Did you know that the internet is one of the most dangerous places? Hackers, viruses, pop-up ads from scammers that can lead to the theft of sensitive information. These are all trivial. The real danger is people. Behind every scam are real people who pretend to be someone else. The scariest part is that every day, naive, easily vulnerable internet users fall into their traps, hoping to get rich quick, meet an attractive man or woman, or simply out of curiosity. All scammers are skilled manipulators who expertly play on emotions. You can be a smart person and still fall for a scam. Of course, we want to believe that we'll never fall for a scammer's tricks, that we're too smart to be deceived. But the truth is, anyone can be fooled. The key is to find the right way to their heart and then exploit their weaknesses. The victim in today's case couldn't even imagine that someone behind a computer screen, hundreds of miles away, someone she had never met, had already decided she must die. This is an insane story about how a stranger online convinced another user to do the unthinkable. It's a case of fraud taken to the extreme. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. What would you be willing to do for $9 million? Would you accept such a sum from a stranger? Would you even believe that someone could just give away such a huge amount? Now think and tell me, how much is a human life worth? Would you be willing to take a life for $9 million? Cynthia Hoffman saw only the good in people. If someone smiled at her, she smiled back. If someone needed help, she offered it without hesitation. If someone spoke to her about friendship, she considered that person a friend because she was always kind, trusting, and eager to be part of something bigger. Cynthia Hoffman, whom her loved ones called CC, was born on October 8, 1999, in Anchorage, Alaska. Cynthia was the middle child in the large, noisy, loving family of Barbara and Timothy Hoffman. She had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, but more than anything in the world, she loved her father. Cynthia was definitely a daddy's girl. While other kids spent their weekends glued to their phones or hanging out at malls, Cynthia helped her father with his work. Timothy was a jack of all trades, and his daughter was his right-hand helper. If he was fixing a fence, she handed him tools. If he was repairing a motorcycle, she was always nearby, ready to assist, support, or fetch something. Raised with values like compassion and empathy, Cynthia was a loyal friend and was always there to support those who needed her. Tim treated Cynthia with more tenderness than his other children. And there was a reason for that. The girl had a slight developmental delay, which made her view the world with childlike innocence. Tim knew that not everyone had good intentions, so he didn't want anyone to take advantage of Cynthia's vulnerability. While his daughter was young, he tried to shield her from insincere friends and difficult situations. The Hoffman family made their home in Anchorage, Alaska, where city life blended with the wild, untamed beauty of nature. The city is known for its charming coffee shops, diverse restaurants, and tight-knit community. But just beyond the bustling city streets lies another world: mountains, dense forests, and vast wilderness stretching to the horizon. Cynthia's family loved Anchorage and calmly embraced the contrast of its seasons. The Hoffmans enjoyed outdoor activities, hiking through rugged trails. At the same time, they cherished the quiet, everyday moments that made up their lives. As a teenager, Cynthia loved being outdoors, but also dedicated a lot of time to her studies, searching for her path in the future. After graduating high school, she completed a special program where she gained practical skills that could help her in her father's business. However, Cynthia wanted independence, so she quickly found a job at a local restaurant and was incredibly proud of herself. She enjoyed meeting new people and earning a living through her own efforts. Though the girl tried to be independent, her father remained her main source of support. He ensured his daughter felt safe in all aspects of life, valued and respected. Given Cynthia's developmental delay, his protective instincts were even stronger. Timothy wanted to shield his daughter from the harsh realities of the world, but also encouraged her desire to realize her potential. Cynthia, in turn, relied heavily on her father as a mentor and close friend. She sent him tons of messages just to share her thoughts, feelings, and daily events. She knew Tim would always listen. More than anything, Cynthia wanted her father to be proud of her. Her determination to succeed shone through in everything she did. However, as much as Cynthia cherished her relationship with her dad, she really wanted something more. She wanted to make friends outside her family and connect more with her peers. Like other teenagers, she craved acceptance, companionship, and a sense of belonging. One day, her childhood dream of having a best friend finally came true. It all started in high school. Two teenage girls met by chance at a mall. They quickly bonded over shared interests, humor, and similar outlooks on life. Denali Bremer attended the same high school as Hoffman. Cynthia's friendship with a peer gave her confidence and a sense of happiness that she could now share her secrets with someone other than her dad. Denali, whose real name was Alexandria Baker, had a difficult childhood. Her conscious life began with tragedy. When she was just 2 years old, her biological mother, Nicole House, gave birth to twins, Corey Ann and Gabrielle. The newborns cried constantly, and their wails irritated their mother's new partner. In a fit of rage, the man committed an act that led to the death of one of the twins. He grabbed the girls, struck them against each other, and threw them onto a bed. Gabrielle fell awkwardly onto the floor, while Corey Ann miraculously survived. All this happened in front of Denali. This tragic event shaped Bremer's later life. As a result, her mother, Nicole, was stripped of custody, and another family adopted the girl. Raised by her adoptive parents, Denali knew what it was like to feel different, to feel like an outsider. Perhaps that's why the two teenagers truly understood each other. Their social media posts painted a picture of two inseparable girls who did everything together. They laughed together, danced together, and celebrated important events together. The captions on their photos read, "Best friends forever." However, what people post online is far from the whole truth. Like most friends, the girls had disagreements, typical teenage quarrels, mostly over boys. Both Denali and Cynthia craved love and attention from the opposite sex and often competed with each other. The girls frequently fell for the same guys. It was typical high school drama. They soon worked things out and went back to laughing and having fun together. Denali often used pseudonyms online. She enjoyed trying on different personas. It was as if this helped her escape her past. After her adoption, she was given the name Denali Dakota Sky Bremer. As a teenager, she preferred to be called Angel. That's how Cynthia's father, Tim, knew her. Bremer was a frequent guest at the Hoffman home and spent a lot of time with Cynthia. They watched movies together or worked on school projects. Tim valued their friendship, knowing how important it was to his daughter, who considered Denali her best friend. But Denali didn't always treat Cynthia like a friend. In fact, she often interrupted her, mocked her way of speaking, and sometimes openly teased her. Cynthia herself seemed not to notice this, or perhaps didn't want to. Besides, every time Denali made her feel uncomfortable, she quickly switched gears and said something nice to Cynthia, smoothing over the hurtful moments. Hoffman clung to those words because she just wanted to keep the friendship. Denali knew this. She was very good at controlling people and getting her way. From a young age, the girl had learned to protect herself and overcome challenges. Deep down, Timothy Hoffman feared this friendship because his trusting, vulnerable daughter could easily fall victim to a trap, lie, or mistreatment. This had been his greatest fear since Cynthia was born. In 2019, Cynthia was 19 years old. Her developmental level was equivalent to that of a 7th grader. Looking back, it's safe to say there were many warning signs that Denali didn't care about Cynthia's best interests. She made Hoffman seek her approval over and over again. One day she swore eternal friendship, and the next she could ignore calls and not respond to texts, acting as if Cynthia didn't exist. In this game, Denali was in charge. She decided when her friend would feel needed and when she'd feel like an outsider. Cynthia herself didn't even realize she was being played and did everything she could to earn Bremer's approval. She was willing to do anything to make Denali happy. But then something changed. Bremer started acting differently. The girl was constantly glued to her phone, giggling about something but never explaining to Cynthia the reason for her good mood. One day, unable to hold back, Denali let slip to her friend about a guy. She said he was insanely rich, handsome, and perfect in every way. Then she showed his photo from a social media profile. A good-looking young man in his 20s stood in front of a fancy car. Denali said he was head over heels in love with her. Cynthia never doubted it because she believed every word her friend said. The truth is, when Bremer was texting her perfect guy, Hoffman felt left out, but she still considered Denali her closest friend. She always thought they'd get an education together, find jobs, and remain friends for the rest of their lives. June 2nd, 2019, was supposed to be an ordinary summer day. Tim expected his daughter to stop by his office that evening to pick up some money for a job they'd recently done together. The father also planned to discuss the next project with Cynthia, but the girl never showed up. At first, Tim didn't think much of it. Maybe she was with friends and lost track of time. But as minutes turned into hours, Tim tried to reach his daughter by phone. He called her number over and over but got no response. This wasn't like Cynthia, because no matter where she was or what she was doing, she always picked up. It was an unspoken family rule to answer calls. Always. Every member of the Hoffman family had a cell phone, and they knew that when Tim called, you had to answer or call back as soon as possible. No one in the family ignored the father's calls, knowing Tim didn't call for no reason. Cynthia didn't respond to the message. "Is everything okay?" either. Timothy tried to reassure himself that his daughter was 19, an adult trying to gain independence. She'd call back soon. But as the night dragged on and the silence grew heavier, the fatherly instinct that had guided him through every stage of Cynthia's life persistently warned him. Something had happened to his daughter. Timothy decided to catch a quick nap, hoping his phone would ring by morning and his daughter would explain the situation. But he couldn't sleep. The father couldn't shake the nagging feeling of anxiety. The next day, June 3rd, when Cynthia still hadn't responded to any messages or called back, Tim's worry intensified. He feared for her safety. The first thing he did was call Denali. If anyone knew what had happened, it would be her best friend. Bremer picked up right away and told Tim that yesterday they'd been hanging out together, and then she dropped Cynthia off at the playground with the polar bears. Hoffman loved playing there as a child, and as an adult, she often went there with friends. Tim didn't understand what Cynthia could have been doing there alone. His daughter hated being alone. That meant she had a meeting planned. The question was, with whom? She would never go somewhere alone because she was afraid of getting lost. Unfortunately, Denali knew nothing about her friend's plans. But Tim was absolutely certain that something bad had happened to Cynthia. He started calling all of his daughter's acquaintances and classmates he could remember, but no one had seen the girl. The man wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for Cynthia to turn up. He hopped on his motorcycle and set out to find his daughter. The first place Tim went was the park where the polar bear playground was located. The park spanned 300 acres. One of its features was the playground with a structure shaped like a polar bear, hence the name. The man searched the park for his daughter. He called her name over and over, but no one responded. All this time, Tim stayed in touch with Denali, who also expressed concern about her friend's disappearance. The girl hoped Cynthia would return home safe and sound. Tim was very grateful for everyone's support, but it couldn't bring his daughter back. So, from the park, he headed straight to the Anchorage police station and filed a missing person report. The father didn't believe Cynthia could vanish without a trace, as if she'd dissolved into thin air. Every normal parent fears losing their child, even an adult one. But because of Cynthia's vulnerabilities, Timothy's fear was magnified several times over. The father's worst nightmare had become reality. The police began their search, and in desperation, Timothy gathered all his friends and acquaintances, and together they scoured the city streets, dense forests, and winding roads on motorcycles and on foot. Volunteers checked every hidden corner, hoping to find any sign or clue that could lead them to Cynthia. That same day, the police knocked on the door of Nicole House's home. As an adult, Denali had reconnected with her biological mother, and they had recently resumed communication. Nicole herself called the police and asked them to come to her house, saying she had some information regarding Cynthia's disappearance. Since Denali was likely the last person to see Hoffman, her biological mother's call piqued the officers' interest. And what Nicole told them changed the course of the investigation. According to the woman, the previous evening, her daughter had come to her with a young man named Caden. Denali was hysterical and crying so hard that her mother couldn't even make out what she was talking about. When her daughter calmed down a bit, she told Nicole a story so unbelievable that the woman initially thought it was a bad joke. She simply couldn't believe something like that could happen in real life. Denali said that Caden, the guy she came with, had shot Cynthia and then pushed her body into a river. Nicole didn't believe any of it, assuming the teenagers were talking nonsense or blowing things out of proportion. The guy was laughing, so the woman thought the confession was a joke. But when she woke up the next morning and saw the news that Cynthia Hoffman was missing, Nicole immediately called the police. It turns out that Denali Bremer had lied to Timothy when she said she dropped Cynthia off at the park and hadn't seen her since. In reality, the girl knew exactly what had happened to her friend when she texted Tim, expressing hope for his daughter's safe return home. It was all a lie, so cold and calculated that it would haunt the Hoffman family for the rest of their lives. Because Cynthia would never come home again, and Denali knew it. On June 4th, detectives brought 18-year-old Denali Bremer to the police station for an official interview. They asked what had happened to her friend, and the girl confessed without hesitation. It all started with a simple message on the morning of June 2nd. Bremer asked Hoffman if she wanted to go on a hike. Among their group of friends, the word hike was a code for smoking weed. Cynthia agreed. She was willing to do anything for someone close to her. But when Denali picked her up in her car, she wasn't alone. Bremer had brought along her friend Caden McIntosh, who was 16 years old. The young people had already smoked weed earlier, and they were in high spirits. Cynthia, too, was caught up in the carefree laughter. As the car drove through Alaska's scenic landscapes, everything was fine. But then the friends decided to stop at a parking lot near Thunderbird Falls, located in Chugach State Park in Alaska, about a 30-minute drive from Anchorage. Thunderbird is a stunning 60-meter waterfall surrounded by dense forest. It was the perfect place to smoke weed and continue the fun. The forest, the sound of the waterfall, and no one around. The three friends hung out together. But then, as Denali said, things took a darker turn. Bremer attributed the subsequent events to stupidity and the fact that they were all high. They joked that the area was so isolated it felt like they'd been kidnapped and taken to a place with no people. Denali claimed the friends decided to stage a fake kidnapping, pretending to be tied up with duct tape and taking photos to prank someone later. The investigators immediately realized the story was far-fetched, but continued to listen carefully to the girl's account. So Cynthia agreed to the plan, and they decided to tie her up first. Denali and Caden wrapped duct tape around Hoffman's ankles. She suddenly started freaking out and demanded to be untied. Cynthia was crying and threatening to call the police, saying they actually meant to kidnap her. The situation was becoming frightening. Denali had illegal substances in her car. If law enforcement showed up, she could face serious trouble. Bremer pulled out her gun, intending to scare Hoffman into silence. But before she realized what was happening, Caden, overcome with emotion, grabbed the gun from her hands and shot Cynthia in the head. Denali watched in horror as her friend fell to the ground, convulsing. Bremer tried to reach for her phone to call 911, but at that moment, Caden made the most horrific decision. He pushed the bound Cynthia into the river. Although she had been shot, she was still alive at that moment. Instead of calling emergency services, Denali and Caden returned to the parking lot, got in the car, and drove away. Later, the friend texted Cynthia's father, saying she hoped his daughter would return home safely. This was her attempt to cover her tracks and divert suspicion from herself and Caden. Then the young people went to another park. There, they burned Cynthia's cell phone, her purse, clothes, ID, and the gun used in the attack. They genuinely believed that destroying these items would help them avoid punishment. After questioning Denali, the detective summoned Caden to hear his version of events. His story was identical. At first, the three were joking. Then Cynthia started threatening to call the police. The boy's mind went blank, and he didn't even remember pulling the trigger. The only thing he recalled was the injured girl twitching on the ground before he pushed her body into the river. Caden's main concern at that moment was ensuring Denali didn't get in trouble with the police. It seemed that Bremer had manipulated this 16-year-old boy. He was clearly obsessed with her and craved her approval. Caden had a romantic interest in Denali, which was evident during his questioning. Of course, this is no excuse, but it appeared that Cynthia's best friend was the driving force behind her death. Thus, the investigation of a missing person turned into a search for her body. Meanwhile, police officers went to the Hoffman family home to deliver the heartbreaking news that their daughter was most likely no longer alive, and the blame lay with her best friend. No parent would want to hear that something so horrific had happened to their child. But Tim had always worried about Cynthia, and his worst nightmare had come true. Shortly before, in the area where Denali and Caden claimed Cynthia had fallen into the water, a young woman's body had washed ashore. The victim was bound with gray duct tape. She had sustained a gunshot wound to the head. Timothy had to identify the remains. The body was indeed that of his daughter, 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman. The father had spent days searching for his child and now had to face the bitter truth. Cynthia was dead. His beloved daughter had been taken from him. After the body was found, Denali Bremer and Caden McIntosh were charged with first-degree murder and evidence tampering, but the investigation didn't end there. Cynthia's father immediately realized that the story told by the young people was fabricated. Timothy was crushed by grief and could barely cope with the horrific news, but he didn't believe it was a spontaneous decision made by two friends and was determined to seek justice. During one of her appearances at a preliminary court hearing, Denali expressed remorse for her actions, admitting she had done wrong. However, she was more concerned not about what she and Caden had done, but about how her daughter would react when she grew up and learned the details of the case. It turned out that 18-year-old Denali Bremer was a mother whose child had been placed in foster care. Most likely, the defendant was simply trying to elicit sympathy, caring little about her own daughter. Then, a few days later, on June 9th, another young man, 19-year-old Caleb Leyland, was arrested. He was charged with conspiracy and murder. Two minors connected to the crime were also arrested, but their identities were kept confidential due to their age. They were handled by a different agency, so little is known about their involvement in the murder. To get to the bottom of it, investigators conducted a thorough review of Denali Bremer's electronic devices and uncovered a wealth of deleted information, social media correspondence, videos, and audio messages. All of this painted a much deeper and darker motive for the crime against Cynthia Hoffman. After the suspects were released on bail, Denali recorded a video message to her followers. She claimed that Caden and another person had shot Cynthia while she herself was held at gunpoint. Now Denali feared for her life because she didn't want to die without testifying against the monsters who had taken her best friend's life. Apparently, this was Bremer's attempt to clear her name. However, the disturbing discoveries didn't end there. When investigators more thoroughly examined the girl's phone, they found an entire chain of messages between Denali and a person named Tyler, as well as videos and photos of the attack on Cynthia. It all looked far less innocent than the teenagers had initially claimed. Based on the messages, Denali had been communicating with Tyler for several months. He lived in Kansas and met Bremer on a dating site, where they developed a transactional romantic relationship based on Denali sending him photos for money. This income allowed the girl to buy illegal substances, which she then sold. Another source of her income was providing intimate services. Denali didn't just send photos and videos online, she also met men in person. Ultimately, Bremer became pregnant by one of her clients. The mounting problems increasingly pushed her toward using heavy illegal substances. The girl even had to carry a firearm due to her risky business. It all started with a simple flirty message from a stranger. Denali was used to attention from men. She was bold, a bit brash, one of those girls who attracted guys with her fiery, untamed nature. But this contact was different from all the others. Tyler was rich, insanely rich. Cynthia saw her friend giggling and unable to tear herself away from her phone. She was texting Tyler, an attractive young man standing in front of a fancy sports car in his profile photo. He acted as if he was crazy about Denali. Classic romantic manipulations. You're special. I've never met a girl like you. I want to take care of you. The fairy tale of a perfect prince who could solve all problems and deal with bullies was something many teenage girls secretly dreamed of. And Denali was lucky enough to meet one. Tyler didn't just promise her love, he promised her money. It started small. First, just photos, then photos in a bikini, after which there was supposed to be even less clothing. And it wasn't for free. For Denali, any money was good, especially when she didn't have to physically engage with a man. Sending explicit photos seemed harmless, and Bremer felt safe, especially when Tyler called her his queen and convinced her they had a special, exclusive relationship. Of course, Denali had suspicions that Tyler wasn't entirely who he claimed to be. For example, on the dating site, he went by Hayden, not Tyler, but she also used fake names online. Even when the guy started asking her to do increasingly perverse things, Denali didn't find him strange, as she had experience dealing with all kinds of men. Plus, the reward kept growing. For Bremer, it was big money, the likes of which she'd never seen before, so the girl tried her best to please her new acquaintance. But Denali wasn't entirely innocent herself. She, in turn, pretended to be in love just to get more money. In reality, it was a double deception, because there was no Tyler. Instead, behind a computer screen in a cramped bedroom in New Salisbury, Indiana, sat a nobody, a 21-year-old guy named Darren Schillmiller, a supermarket clerk. There was no sports car, no private jets, no million-dollar bank accounts. Just a predatory manipulator sitting in his grandparents' house, pulling strings like a puppeteer. Naturally, he used someone else's photo on dating apps. Darren had done this before. For years, he pretended to be someone else online, deceiving women and luring men, testing how far they would go. One woman believed she was talking to a celebrity. Another thought she'd found her dream job. A third sent explicit photos, hoping for a real-life continuation of a virtual romance. Darren knew exactly how to manipulate people. With Denali, he decided to play the long game. First, he made her fall for him with sweet words, made her feel needed and desired, got her hooked on his attention, then isolated her from friends by convincing her that no one else understood her like he did, and finally made a demand that was meant to test her loyalty. No normal person would ever agree to such a thing, but Bremer did. Darren wasn't just extorting money or demanding inappropriate things. This time, he wanted blood. Denali was already too deep in this scam. She had fallen for a ghost. The guy offered her more money for increasingly explicit content, pushing her to cross a line. One of the most disturbing demands was for her to record content of her forcibly restraining or even fighting someone to impress him. Bremer was so caught up in their relationship, and of course, the financial gain, that she agreed to fulfill increasingly bizarre requests. Sometimes she enlisted her friends like Caden and Caleb, promising them money for staging a fight on camera. When Darren offered the girl $9 million to take someone's life, Denali didn't know what to think until she checked her PayPal account and saw a pending transaction for exactly $9 million. At first, she thought it was a joke, but Darren kept insisting. He painted a picture of the luxurious life they would live once Bremer fulfilled his demands. The guy insisted that his fiancée had to prove she was willing to do anything for him, only then could he trust her. Take a random person's life and instantly become rich. Denali's greed was strong and she agreed. But it wasn't that simple, because Darren had specific conditions. The victim had to be a woman. And Bremer decided it would be Cynthia, because she trusted her and wouldn't resist even the craziest plan. So, Hoffman's fate was sealed long before the actual events. Denali wasn't going to do it alone because she needed help. And so, she turned to her acquaintances, reckless teenagers looking for thrills. The first to be recruited was 16-year-old Caden McIntosh. Then came 19-year-old Caleb Leyland, who agreed to lend his car to carry out the plan. That's how a group of teenagers signed up for a heinous crime for the promise of a big payoff, for money that didn't exist, and for a random person they probably wouldn't even have spoken to in real life. From the correspondence between the three conspirators, it was clear that Denali had chosen the location, a remote area where no one would hear Cynthia's screams. Once the plan was set in motion, Bremer would send Darren a message, and when everything was done, he would confirm the $9 million transfer, or so Denali thought. At that moment, Cynthia still had no idea what awaited her. She believed she was going on a little adventure with her best friend, and had no clue she was heading to her execution. She didn't suspect that her life would soon end in its prime. And the worst part was that Denali seemed to feel nothing. No guilt, no doubts, just excitement. Because she saw dollar signs, and Cynthia was just the price to pay. It's unclear how Denali convinced Cynthia to let her tie her up and tape her mouth shut. As soon as the poor girl realized the joking was over, she panicked. When Caden began pulling off her clothes, she started screaming and struggling. Her best friend recorded everything on her phone and sent the photos to her virtual lover. When it was over, the teenagers gathered the scattered items from the ground, returned to the car, and drove off to dispose of the evidence. At that moment, Denali didn't regret what she'd done. To her, it was just another task to complete to secure a massive sum and a chance at a carefree life. When investigators confronted Denali with the fact that the man she had saved in her phone as baby was Darren Schillmiller, an ordinary liar and manipulator, the girl decided to distance herself from him. Her love instantly vanished. Now he was a monster who had tricked her into committing a bloody crime. On June 19, 2019, Darren was arrested, but long before his name hit the headlines, long before he orchestrated the murder from behind a computer screen in another state, there were signs that this man was dangerous. More than anything, he was aroused by dirty diapers. In a small town with a population of just 600, Darren sent messages to young mothers, asking for photos of their children. Just a year before Cynthia's murder, a young woman named Cheyenne met a guy named Austin on a dating app. At first, he seemed normal. The conversation was flirty, light, and harmless, until one day Austin asked his new acquaintance for a strange favor, to record a video of her changing her children's diapers. Cheyenne was so stunned that she blocked the user and deleted her account. When the woman learned that Austin lived in her hometown in Indiana, she got seriously scared. She eventually mustered the courage to meet this man. It turned out that behind the name Austin was her former classmate, Darren Schillmiller. Cheyenne posted on social media, sharing her experience with other women. She tried to bring attention to the issue, but Darren sent her a message, apologizing and promising never to ask for anything like that again. The guy deceived his classmate to get her to delete the compromising post, and soon, another attractive young man appeared on the dating site, this time under the name Dylan. Darren once again used a fake identity to contact a potential victim. Another woman, Brittany, had known Darren for years. They even dated for a while in high school. The guy was awkward, quiet, but also cruel, and Brittany forgot about him right after their breakup. In February 2019, Darren suddenly re-entered her life, sending a message from his real social media account. It seemed harmless. The former classmates chatted a bit. Everything was fine until Darren said he had a personal problem and supposedly wanted to get rid of his fetish. To do so, he asked her to send him a video of her changing a baby's diaper. Brittany immediately deleted the entire conversation and blocked Darren. Both women stayed silent about the young man's strange requests and only spoke out after Schillmiller was arrested. They feared for their own lives and the lives of their children. His ex-girlfriend, Brittany, revealed that during their relationship, the guy had repeatedly been violent toward her. That's why they broke up. On Thursday, June 13th, 2019, just 2 days after Darren's arrest, the streets of Anchorage were filled with the roar of motorcycles. It was a statement, a final tribute from a father to his daughter, whom he lost too soon. Timothy Hoffman asked his biker friends to escort the hearse carrying Cynthia's body to the church, and the community responded. Bikers from all over the area rode together as one. It wasn't just a farewell, it was a celebration of Cynthia's spirit. People came together to support her father in his fight for justice. Hundreds gathered at the church, but Timothy didn't want the friendship to be only about grief and sorrow. He had lost his daughter, but he wanted everyone to remember the joy she radiated. How she laughed too loudly and loved without holding back. How she saw the world differently, but always approached it with kindness. It wasn't just a memorial, it was a way to keep Cynthia's memory alive. Instead of letting grief take over, Timothy ensured the farewell was filled with stories, music, and smiles. That's what his late daughter would have wanted. But the fight for justice wasn't over. While others mourned, Timothy planned his next steps. Because the very next morning at 8:30, he had to face the people who stole his daughter's life in court. The father was determined to fight to the end. He had a mission to ensure that the monsters who hurt his child would pay in full. Tim vowed to attend every court proceeding. In August 2019, Darren Schillmiller was charged but pleaded not guilty. During the court hearings, the Hoffman family brought a large photo of Cynthia, where she stood in front of a mural with wings painted behind her. It made her look like an angel. It was their deliberate choice. Timothy Hoffman wanted Darren to see Cynthia's face, the life he had taken, and realize the devastation he left behind. Timothy begged the court to deny Darren bail and cut off his internet access, fearing the young man could ruin someone else's life. The father clutched a cross necklace containing his daughter's ashes. It was the only thing he had left of his little girl. While Timothy spoke, Darren simply shook his head. The man was unwavering. It was his grief, his rage, and his love for his daughter. Those emotions filled the courtroom entirely. During the trial, the girl who lured Cynthia into a trap, the guy who pulled the trigger, and the mastermind who gave the orders sat at the defense table. There wasn't a single empty seat in the room. Denali Bremer, Caden McIntosh, and Darren Schillmiller kept their heads down and looked nothing like the people they had pretended to be. Denali was no longer a powerful queen, Caden was no fearless shooter, and Darren was no wealthy arbiter of fates. They were ordinary people who had ruined their own lives and the life of an innocent girl, and now they had to face the consequences. Cynthia's father had waited years for this moment. When Timothy stepped up to the witness stand, he looked straight at Denali Bremer and didn't hold back. He spoke about how his daughter had developmental delays, how she saw the world differently, how she trusted people with childlike innocence and saw a friend in Denali with whom she could share all her joys and sorrows. But instead, Cynthia had to beg her for mercy. Denali tied her up like an animal and laughed as she cried. At that moment, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Caleb Leyland, who provided his car, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. In his final statement, he said he didn't believe his friends would go through with it, yet he participated in the conspiracy. Caden McIntosh, who pulled the trigger, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He claimed he had blacked out and didn't remember who pulled the trigger. Darren Schillmiller, the mastermind of the crime, received 99 years in prison for incitement to murder and an additional 30 years without the possibility of parole for conspiracy. The young man said nothing in his defense. Last was Denali Bremer, Cynthia's best friend. She also received 99 years in prison for first-degree murder and an additional 30 years for conspiracy. The girl broke down in tears and begged for a second chance. But the judge didn't care because Cynthia would never get a second chance. She had lost hers forever. Sadly, the tragedies for the Hoffman family didn't end there. After the trial, every anniversary of Cynthia's death, Timothy decided to hold a motorcycle ride in her memory. The first ride was small, with just a few of Tim's close friends, but over the years, more and more bikers joined them. More and more people came to support Timothy. Each year, with his daughter's name on his leather jacket, he led the motorcycle ride down a long, winding road. The group followed the same path Cynthia had once taken to her certain death. The ride was meant to be a tribute, a way to say that Cynthia would never be forgotten. On June 2nd, 2023, Timothy Hoffman set out again, accompanied by 50 people. The first stop was breakfast at the Carousel Cafe. Then they rode along the trails, with the final destination being Thunderbird Falls in Chugach State Park, where Cynthia took her last breath. But Timothy never made it there. At 1:30 p.m., as the group rode along the highway, something happened. Hoffman's motorcycle lost control, veered off the road, and flipped. Tim's wife was riding behind him, and both were thrown onto the pavement. The bikers shouted and rushed to help, but Timothy wasn't responding. Medics arrived and rushed him to the hospital, but sadly, the man didn't survive. Tim's wife suffered a fractured skull and spine and underwent several surgeries. For 4 years, Timothy couldn't come to terms with Cynthia's tragic fate, and on the 4th anniversary of her death, he followed her. Cynthia's mother said the only thing Tim ever wanted was justice for their daughter, and now they were together again. Cynthia's story is not just a tragedy. It's also a warning, a reminder that the internet can be a dangerous place. Social media is meant for communication and should bring people together, but there are other Darren Schillmillers out there looking for naive victims. When talking to a stranger online, you can't be certain who they are or if they're real. In the end, Cynthia wasn't harmed by a thug in a dark alley. Her life was taken by someone she loved and trusted. And the blame lies with words and promises given by a stranger to her friend. Always question what you see and read online. Not everyone you call a friend is truly one. If something feels off, trust your instincts. Have you ever encountered deception online? Share your story in the comments. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. If you're not a ruggedly handsome guy with chiseled muscles and haven't achieved success in life, women won't pay attention to you. The world is unfair, and any effort is futile. All troubles come from women. They are the ones to blame for your loneliness. These aren't just the words of a resentful man. They are the principles on which the entire ideology of incels is based. Who are incels? And what connection do they have to the bloody tragedy that unfolded in Canada in 2018? We'll find out today. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Incels, mostly men, who are unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite a strong desire to do so. Incels place the entire blame for their involuntary celibacy on women. They feel rejected, not only by the opposite sex, but by society as a whole. In fact, this movement was founded by a Canadian woman named Alana. who created the Alana's Involuntary Celibacy Project, but it was soon taken over by men who believed they were entitled to an intimate life and were angry that women weren't providing it. A 22-year-old virgin, Elliot Rodger, became a sort of symbol for incels after he took the lives of 6 people at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2014. He explained his crimes as an act of revenge against the women who rejected him and showed him indifference. In a video he posted shortly before the attack, Elliot said he had never even been kissed. According to Rodger, college is a time when everyone experiences things like sex, fun, and pleasure. But during those years, he had to rot in loneliness. It's unfair. Girls were never attracted to him, and for that, he would punish them all. Unfortunately, Elliot Rodger was able to carry out his sinister plan. 6 people died, after which the perpetrator took his own life. Most people sympathized with the victims' families, but there were those who praised Elliot's series of crimes. The main figure in today's story, named Alec Manassian, wasn't just a member of the online incel community. Alec was friends with Elliot Rodger. As the saying goes, "Tell me who your friend is, and I'll tell you who you are." As it would later become clear, nothing good came from this friendship. Manassian, despite his friend's death, was deeply inspired by his bloody act and wanted to continue the incel uprising. Alec Manassian was born on November 3, 1992, in Richmond Hill, Canada, near Toronto. He lived with his parents and older brother. Alec's childhood was spent in a comfortable environment. His father had immigrated from Armenia to Canada and worked as a software developer, while his mother was from Iran and worked at an IT company. The family bought a beautiful house in the suburbs and was quite happy. However, for Alec, things weren't so simple. As a child, he was described as a somewhat strange kid. Alec was very quiet, very sensitive, but he struggled to understand social cues. The boy avoided eye contact and couldn't carry on a conversation. Alec felt awkward in social settings because he didn't know how to communicate. He never mastered this skill, even as an adult. When Alec started school, he couldn't fit in with his peers. He often played alone on the playground and never talked to other kids in class. When a teacher addressed him, the schoolboy would get very angry because he didn't like the attention. He didn't want teachers asking him questions or making him answer in front of the whole class. Standing at the blackboard while everyone watched and giving a presentation was his worst nightmare. To avoid this, the boy would stand up and bolt out of the classroom door. Alec also hated being praised. He generally didn't accept any form of attention, whether good or bad. Worst of all, the schoolboy not only didn't know how to interact with other kids, he didn't want to. His parents also had a hard time. When Alec didn't get what he wanted, he threw tantrums. Sometimes he would run off and bang his head against the wall, and this child was completely unable to smile, let alone laugh. He saw difficulties in everything, and life itself seemed like one endless ordeal to Alec. After years of struggling with their son's behavior, his parents took him to a doctor. Alec was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder. This is an outdated psychiatric diagnosis given to children who exhibit some, but not all, signs of autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's syndrome. In middle school, Alec attended classes for children with autism, but it didn't help much. In high school, the young man still faced challenges, particularly with socialization. He continued to struggle greatly with communicating with classmates. This led to bullying and harassment. Other students didn't like that Alec was different, not like them. He became a target for bullies, students who disregarded accepted norms of behavior and didn't try to understand his situation. The bullying intensified even more when Alec displayed physical quirks. For example, he would sometimes shake violently, rock back and forth, constantly touch something, or tap his head or some surface. Alec also had a habit of spitting on his hands and rubbing them together. Sometimes he would lift his shirt, pull it over his head, and spit into it. This greatly irritated and amused other kids. Another physical quirk was that Alec would walk around people and start growling or meowing, then try to bite them. Because of this behavior, the young man was teased and called Chewbacca from Star Wars. Other students laughed at him, but Alec couldn't understand why. He couldn't read social cues and thought his classmates liked it when he meowed or growled at them, so he tried to do it as often as possible. The teasing grew even worse. It was a vicious cycle. His nickname Chewbacca stuck so much that many students at school didn't even know his real name. Throughout his school years, Alec was isolated from society and felt very lonely. He had no friends. In class, Minassian was a loner. Coming home after school, he was alone again in his room. Later, another problem emerged: girls. In high school, Alec not only couldn't talk to female classmates, he could barely look in their direction. If a girl looked at Alec or tried to talk to him, he would freeze in place and shut down, not knowing what to do. When other students discussed which girls they liked, Alec didn't know what to say. He felt awkward, and this again drew his classmates' attention. So, the topic of relationships with girls became yet another reason to bully Alec. Under the threat of beatings, he was forced to approach girls. Minassian would approach female classmates and start blushing, stuttering, and getting embarrassed. This amused the entire class, but for Alec, it became another school nightmare. It got to the point where he simply became afraid of women, associating them with the bullying. It became normal for him to rock back and forth and mutter under his breath that he didn't like girls. Whenever a female classmate approached him, Alec would jump back and yell for her not to hurt him. His fear of girls was so deep that it extended far beyond school. If the Minassian family went to a restaurant and the server was a woman who asked Alec what he wanted to order, the young man would just freeze silently, not knowing how to respond. All the social experience Alec gained in school consisted of constant mockery and humiliation. When he finally graduated from high school, he was over the moon with joy because the more he was bullied, the more he withdrew into himself. Alec hardly left the house, as he was afraid of the outside world. And since he spent so much time at home, locked in his room, the young man turned to video games. The internet became his entire world, a source of comfort. It was the only way Alec could interact with other people, because he was in the comfort and safety of his own home. This obsession with communicating online would later play a role in the case, but in a much darker way. Alec's fascination with the internet and video games later led him to pursue a degree in computer programming. Minassian enrolled in a college in Toronto, close to his family's home. The young man started attending classes and excelled academically. Computers were his salvation, something he was great at. Alec still struggled to communicate with classmates, but now he was in his element. He could talk about programming and computers for hours. In college, he even made some friends who shared his interests. Minassian was such a diligent student that he began helping other students in his class. Studying at the university brought him satisfaction for the first time. He enjoyed life and gradually gained confidence. Now Alec could calmly raise his hand, answer teachers' questions, and speak in front of an audience. After what he had endured in high school, this was a major achievement. Several years passed, and things were going better and better for Alec, but then, at some point, his life went downhill again, and the reason was girls. In October 2013, Alec Minassian was in his third year of college. He was a few weeks away from turning 21. All he could think about now was girls and relationships with them. Although Alec had made friends and his social skills had improved, when it came to interacting with the opposite sex, he still got lost. During his time in college, Alec had glimmers of hope. At one point, he mustered the courage to ask a female classmate for her phone number. She gave it to him, but when Alec texted her, she didn't respond. All his good mood instantly vanished. This was a real blow for the young man. Despite this, at the end of October, Alec went to a Halloween party, determined to meet a beautiful girl and even try to flirt. Gathering his courage, he approached a group of girls. When they noticed him, they started laughing for some reason. Alec felt shame and embarrassment when a group of guys appeared, tall, muscular, and very attractive, according to Alec, the girls approached them and started touching their muscles. The group was joking and flirting with each other, paying no further attention to Manassian. In the end, he left the party very angry. At that moment, he felt the world was unfair. Why were girls only attracted to arrogant, jacked-up guys and not someone like Alec, kind, smart, and polite? Why did they always laugh at him? All he wanted was to flirt, to be hugged and kissed. After leaving that party, Alec kept thinking about the unfairness of life. He replayed these thoughts over and over in his head, and it became a pivotal moment for him because his views on women changed radically, turning negative. It was this unfortunate party that pushed Alec to become an incel. Manassian dove headfirst into the internet, searching for people with similar problems, people who were frustrated that girls never paid them attention, didn't want to date them or go out with them. That's when he stumbled upon incel forums. As mentioned earlier, incels define themselves as those who desperately desire intimate relationships but cannot find a romantic partner. They believe they are forced to remain celibate against their will. In recent years, the term incel has been associated with young people who hold highly destructive and dangerous views about society in general, and women in particular. They want to take revenge for their disappointments, to hurt people. Their overarching ideology is that society is broken, unfairly treats incels, and that women are only interested in wealthy, successful, attractive young men. Incels even have their own terminology, dividing people into several categories. According to them, only 20% of men are attractive and successful chads, meaning sexually desirable. They are pursued by Stacies, young, attractive girls and women who passionately want to be with chads. Incels wholeheartedly hate chads and Stacies, envying the former and desiring intimacy with the latter, but unable to attain it, as Stacies are only interested in chads. The rest are normies, ordinary people of average attractiveness and income who occupy the middle of the hierarchy. Incels also hate normies because they, too, don't want to engage in intimate relationships with them. Incels themselves are at the bottom of the hierarchical ladder, the omega or beta males, the lowest tier. Incels believe women only choose alpha males and ignore others. No one wants to be intimate with incels, neither Stacies nor normies. Most incels don't strive to change themselves, believing any effort is futile because the world is inherently unfair. They don't think the problem lies within themselves. They blame it all on their appearance. Incels believe they have a right to physical intimacy, but in today's world, women have too many choices. Of course, they blame the opposite sex entirely, especially feminists. According to members of the online incel community, women should be distributed equally among everyone, but the cool guys take them for themselves. Women should, essentially, accept their lot and stay silent, not choose the best among men. Incels go so far as to say that every day a woman denies them intimacy is, in fact, a form of reverse assault, as dangerous and destructive to a man as actual violence. However, hatred toward women and aggressive rhetoric are only the visible part of the problem. Under the guise of incel principles, real crimes have been committed. It was on such internet forums that Alec Manassian stumbled. There, he found like-minded individuals and quickly immersed himself in the world of incels and their ideology. In January 2014, Alec came across a post that caught his attention. It was written by none other than Elliot Rodger, the Supreme Gentleman, as he called himself, who would later commit a mass crime. Manassian was so moved by Elliot's words that he sent him a private message, and the two young men developed a fairly close relationship. Alec felt he truly understood and empathized with Elliot and the struggles he had faced. Although Rodger lived in the US and Manassian in Canada, they wanted to meet in person. Alec admired his new friend. 4 months later, Elliot started sending Alec cryptic messages saying he was going on an important mission but wasn't sure if he'd return alive, and that many incels supported him, and were calling for an uprising. Manassian wished his friend luck. 3 days later, on May 23, 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rodger carried out a series of attacks in California, killing 6 people and injuring 14 others. Before committing the mass shooting, Elliot posted a manifesto online detailing all his life's problems. He explained his actions as a desire to punish women for rejecting him and successful men for their status. After Elliot's suicide, some communities began to revere him as a martyr, a hero. After all, everything he did was for incels. This was the beginning of the uprising. Alec Manassian himself said he was proud of Elliot and what he had done. The young man became increasingly immersed in the incel community. A year later, in 2015, Alec began corresponding with another incel named Chris Harper Mercer, and it turned out that Chris would become another mass perpetrator. In the fall of 2015, Chris Harper Mercer was fed up with his life. He had no girlfriend and didn't even hope to find one. He was so inspired by Elliot Rodger's actions that he acquired a firearm and carried out a mass shooting known as the Umpqua Community College shooting in Roseburg, Oregon. On October 1, 2015, Harper Mercer killed 9 people and injured another 9 on campus before taking his own life. And this was another guy Alec was friends with. Watching the fame and honor his 2 friends received in the incel community, Manassian began dreaming of something similar. He wanted to be seen as a hero and elevated to a pedestal of glory. Alec wanted to overthrow Chads and Stacys and create a just society where incels would finally take their rightful place in the world. He couldn't stop fantasizing about an incel uprising, and he was drawn deeper and deeper into this toxic world. Over the last 6 years since starting college, Alec had many ups and downs. He studied at the university for a couple of years, then dropped out and got a job. After being fired, Manassian returned to college, only to drop out again. His parents were tired of their son's behavior. He didn't want to take responsibility for his future and set no clear goals for himself. Alec still lived at home, with no prospects of getting a good job or even finishing college. That's when his parents convinced him to join the army. However, a place like the army was hardly the best fit for Alec. Nevertheless, he passed the entrance exams with flying colors and, for the first time, left his parents' home, moving to Quebec for military training. The young man tried his best to build relationships with other recruits, but the unfamiliar pace of life took a toll on his physical condition. During training, Alec constantly fell and stumbled. His nervous tic became more noticeable, and it distracted others. Manassian couldn't process information, didn't understand instructions, and couldn't perform even basic tasks like making his bed, keeping his clothes in order, or polishing his shoes. Due to his lack of self-discipline, Alec constantly lagged behind, causing problems for his platoon. Naturally, this behavior caused dissatisfaction, and other recruits began to badmouth and insult Alec behind his back. The bullying started again. No one understood how he had even passed the entrance exam to get into the training program. The training center's leadership decided they couldn't entrust Alec Manassian with a firearm if he couldn't even make his bed or meet basic requirements. It was clear to everyone that this guy was not cut out for the army. After 16 days at the military training center, Alec caught tonsillitis and was sent home. After his failed attempt to join the army, the young man's resentment toward the world's unfairness only grew stronger. Discharged from the armed forces, Alec returned to college at age 25. He had only 1 semester left before he could earn his diploma. However, Alec returned to college a completely different person. His brief military experience had changed him, making him more volatile and aggressive. Before, he was so withdrawn and awkward in communication that he couldn't talk to anyone normally. But now he started arguing with other students and getting into fights. Alec told one classmate he left the army because they didn't let him use weapons as often as he wanted. During his final semester in college, Manassian sank deeper and deeper into the incel community. He was 25 years old and had never been on a date with a girl. He was angry at the world for ignoring him. He was tired of constantly being rejected. And now Alec Manassian wanted to become a legend in the incel community, like Elliot Rodger and Chris Harper Mercer, and he planned how best to achieve that. On April 19, 2018, Alec finally graduated from college, earning his diploma after 7 years, and soon after he put his horrific plan into action. On April 22, 2018, Alec went to an incel forum and wrote that tomorrow would be the beta male uprising. He called on other incels to join the rebellion and overthrow the unjust society. Many praised Alec, and he liked the attention. One user wrote that he also had a plan to stage a beta uprising in November 2018. Fortunately, that plan turned out to be an empty threat. But Alec Manassian was serious. He genuinely believed that incels needed to fight back and take revenge for their failed lives, which he later did. Around noon on April 23, 2018, Alec arrived at a Ryder truck rental location in Toronto. The young man decided to rent a vehicle to carry out his plan because he had no way to buy a firearm. A couple of weeks before the set date, he reserved a van, intending to use it as a deadly weapon. Manassian deliberately chose a mid-sized van. He told the rental company he needed the vehicle to move out of college. Just in case, the company's staff checked Alec's background in their database, but found no suspicious details about the university graduate. That day, Alec approached the administrator's desk, received the keys to the rented van, and asked the woman working there to show him how to start the engine. The rental company employees laughed at Alec because it was the first time a customer couldn't start the vehicle on their own. Alec sat in the van for about 20 minutes, replaying his plan in his head over and over. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and posted on social media, writing that the incel uprising had begun. "I will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. Long live the supreme gentleman Elliot Rodger." Then Alec started the van and confidently drove out of the rental company's parking lot. The white van drove past the university where Alec studied and headed toward Yonge Street in Toronto's Northern District. On Monday, April 23, 2018, the weather was nice. People were strolling along the street, enjoying their lunch break. Yonge Street is one of the busiest streets in Toronto. It's home to many restaurants, retail stores, and other establishments. There was a movie theater, a shopping mall, several pharmacies, a fast food restaurant, and hardware stores. In short, it had just about everything. Yonge Street had very wide sidewalks, so it was always full of pedestrians. That day, people were going about their daily routines, shopping, grabbing a bite, or walking with their kids. It was an ordinary weekday, but soon everything changed because at 1:24 p.m., Alec drove onto Yonge Street in the rented white van. It all started when Manassian ran a red light at a very busy intersection. He honked at other cars to get them to yield. Then he quickly swerved onto the curb and drove onto the sidewalk. It was a wide pedestrian path crowded with people. Alec pressed the gas pedal and crashed into a large group of people, injuring several and, unfortunately, instantly killing one of them. But Alec didn't stop there. He pressed the gas pedal again and continued driving along the sidewalk, hitting everyone he could. At that moment, people further down the street realized what was happening. Naturally, mass panic broke out. Complete chaos erupted, pedestrians screamed and shouted, trying to flee to safety. They were literally jumping out from under the wheels of the rampaging incel, speeding along the sidewalk. Other drivers on the road watched the white van in horror, completely unsure of what to do. Some ran to help the injured, some pulled distracted pedestrians off the sidewalk, and others just stood and watched, unable to grasp the tragedy of the situation. Alec Manassian kept moving at high speed, hitting everything in his path. He knocked down telephone poles, crashed into bus stops, and then reached Mel Lastman Square, another very busy area, and crashed into a crowd of people again. At that moment, emergency services were flooded with calls from eyewitnesses. On Yonge Street, where the attack began, drivers jumped out of their cars to help the injured. Bodies lay face down on the ground everywhere, and it was unclear whether they were alive or dead. The first police officer to arrive on foot at the scene tried to help as many people as possible, but it was difficult amid the complete chaos. The law enforcement officer came across a woman lying face down and tried to turn her over to check if she was alive. Unfortunately, he found no signs of life. The officer moved from one body to another, trying to provide first aid as best he could. Store and pharmacy workers brought out supplies that could be useful: bandages, medications, towels, but sadly, some of the victims could no longer be saved due to their injuries. Meanwhile, after traveling 2.5 kilometers, Alec Manassian realized his van had sustained too much damage, and the vehicle stalled. This meant the attack was finally over. However, Alec was caught up in the moment and thought about how to continue his uprising. He climbed out of the van and came face to face with a police officer. The officer immediately drew his gun, pointed it at Alec, and shouted for him to get on the ground and put his hands behind his head. But Manassian refused to comply. He reached into his back pocket, hoping the officer would think he had a weapon and shoot, thus ending Alec's life. The young man tried to provoke the officer, but he remained calm. The law enforcement officer quickly realized Alec had no weapon, so he returned to his patrol car, turned on the siren, and addressed Manassian again. But Alec hadn't committed a mass crime just to surrender to the authorities. He wanted to die a hero, so he pulled a black wallet from his pocket and pointed it at the officer, threatening to shoot. He still hoped that, in the chaos, the officer wouldn't realize it was just a wallet and would fire first. However, the detective didn't rush. He said no one else needed to get hurt, as Manassian, in desperation, shouted for the officer to kill him right then and there. The law enforcement officer remained calm and composed, keeping the suspect at gunpoint, then holstered his weapon, drew his baton, and walked straight toward Alec. That's when the young man got truly scared, raised his hands, and immediately surrendered. The officer handcuffed him and made the arrest. This happened just 7 minutes after the attack began. The entire incel uprising, led by Alec Manassian, lasted exactly 7 minutes, including the standoff with the police officer. But in that time, he managed to cause havoc and take several lives. After the perpetrator's arrest, paramedics set up an emergency medical aid station right at the scene. Bus and subway services in Toronto were completely halted that day. Businesses in the area were also forced to close. The police were concerned that this attack might be part of a larger, coordinated assault on Toronto. The authorities didn't yet know the motive for the crime, but within minutes of the arrest, everything became clear. They quickly identified the attacker by finding his social media post. Alec Manassian's face appeared in all the news, and it was revealed that he was a lonely incel. Now, emergency services had to determine how many people had been affected by the attack. It turned out that 10 innocent people died at the scene. Among the victims were Renuka Amarasinghe, a 45-year-old single mother who left behind a 7-year-old son; Anne-Marie D'Amico, a 30-year-old investment firm employee; Chol Min Chang, a 45-year-old man from South Korea who worked as a chef; Betty Forsyth, a 94-year-old Scotswoman who had beaten cancer and was loved by everyone in the community; Dorothy Sewell, an 80-year-old grandmother who was the backbone of her family; Munir Abed Al-Najjar, an 85-year-old man from Jordan who had come to visit family in Canada; Sohee Chung, a 22-year-old student at the University of Toronto; Ji-Hoon Kim, another 22-year-old student from Korea; Andrea Braddon, a 33-year-old aunt adored by her 4 nieces and nephews; and finally, Geraldine Brady, an 83-year-old beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. All these innocent people were living ordinary lives, and that Monday, each was going about their business. In addition to the 10 people who died at the scene, another 16 sustained serious injuries, such as concussions, spinal damage, and broken limbs that ultimately had to be amputated. These 16 people received injuries that changed their lives forever. We mustn't forget those who weren't physically harmed, but suffered emotional and psychological trauma. There were many such people. This was exactly what Alec Manassian aimed for when he got behind the wheel of the white van. After the tragedy that unfolded on the streets of Toronto, members of the incel community celebrated what Alec had done. They rejoiced that 10 innocent people had died, 8 of whom were women. Incels saw this as an achievement. They even debated how many beers to drink in honor of each woman killed. Alec Manassian was given the nickname Saint Alec, and songs were written praising his feat to be uploaded to YouTube. Throughout the interrogation at the police station, Alec acted detached and almost emotionless. He felt no remorse for what he had done and answered questions so casually, as if he were talking not about dead people, but about a bowling game where the pins unexpectedly became living men and women. In reality, Alec was incredibly proud of himself, so he calmly told the officers about his plan. The young man mentioned the 2013 Halloween party, where a group of girls laughed at his attempts to flirt with them, which served as the catalyst for everything that happened on Toronto's central streets. Alec spoke about his attitude toward girls and women, saying no one had ever shown interest in him despite being a fairly attractive, intelligent guy. Then Manassian shared the incel community's ideology with the officers, explaining who Chad's and Stacy's were and why they needed to be toppled from their pedestal. He admitted to having friendly correspondence with Elliot Rodger and Chris Harper Mercer and supporting their militant beliefs. Alec remained in jail awaiting trial for the subsequent months. The trial for Manassian's case began only 2.5 years later, in November 2020. The defense team argued that Alec was not criminally responsible because his autism severely distorted his perception of reality and significantly influenced his decision-making. However, this defense didn't work. It was established that Alec was very intelligent and well-developed, and his disorder in no way prevented him from making morally correct decisions. Ultimately, Alec Manassian was found guilty on all charges, including 10 counts of murder and 16 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. After this heartbreaking tragedy, a memorial was erected near the street where it all happened. In the months following the attack, many people filed lawsuits against Alec Manassian and the Ryder Truck Rental Company. A chemistry professor named Amir suffered a traumatic brain injury, multiple spinal fractures, memory loss, and fell into depression as a result of the attack. He filed a lawsuit for $6 million Canadian for the damage to his health. A woman named Catherine filed a lawsuit for $3.6 million after suffering a traumatic brain injury, a collapsed lung, and fractures to her spine, pelvis, and ribs. The family of Anne-Marie D'Amico, one of the victims killed in the attack, filed a lawsuit for $1 million, intending to donate the money to the Anne-Marie Fund, which supports women who are victims of violence. Finally, a nurse named Amaria Stessa Mariam filed a lawsuit for $14 million after sustaining a spinal injury and traumatic brain injury that left her unable to move any part of her body below the neck or breathe on her own without a machine. The 65-year-old Amaria was never able to leave the hospital, and 3.5 years later, in October 2021, she died from her injuries, making her the 11th victim of this case. Incels, most members of the community, instead of working on themselves, prefer to blame others, particularly women, for their failures in their personal lives. Although violent acts among incels are rare, they don't condemn the perpetrators but praise their actions. And this propaganda can lead to tragic consequences, as in the case of Alec Manassian. It's worth remembering that people don't become incels overnight. More often than not, it's the result of a long journey filled with feelings of loneliness, worthlessness, and rejection. Young men disappointed in love stumble upon these forums and websites where they find support from like-minded individuals, where they can openly complain about loneliness and failures with girls. But in the end, it can lead to the destruction of not only their own lives, but also an open rebellion against a supposedly unjust society. This is precisely the insidious way Alec Manassian took revenge for all the wrongs, bullying, and mockery he endured. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. In the spring of 2014, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill was subjected to violence in her own home and was brutally killed. This crime was called unimaginable, repulsive, horrific, and disgusting. But when you learn the details, all these terms will seem like a clear understatement. They say that eerie feeling never goes away, no matter how many times they've been called to such scenes. One officer recalled hoping each time that there was some mistake and the dead person would suddenly start moving, talking, and turn out to be alive. Another remembered his first encounter with a death scene. He had to photograph the deceased, their eyes frozen forever. The expert kept reminding himself that this was his job, that it had to be done. And then you have to make sure you leave all the emotions at the scene and don't bring them home. After the first time, those glassy eyes haunted his dreams for several nights. This is the work of crime scene investigators. They have to be there to meticulously document every detail as evidence. It's an incredibly tough job. Everyone who's done it eventually retires with post-traumatic stress disorder. Constantly documenting tragedy and the worst manifestations of humanity never comes without a cost. Simply seeing an image is not at all the same as being at a crime scene, where trauma, grief, and violence are no longer abstract. Photographs are usually provided in at least 3 sets. Wide-angle shots to show the jury the entire crime scene. Then medium-distance shots to display several pieces of evidence and their relationship to each other and the whole scene. If a knife is lying next to a chair, the photograph needs to show the exact distance without distorting the perspective. Then come close-up shots of specific evidence. Usually the public sees only the most innocent, if you can call them that, crime scene photos. But experts and detectives have to closely examine every detail, every wound on a dead body, and capture it all on camera. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. On March 27, 2014, police officers arrived at a residential complex located in Corpus Christi, Texas. A maintenance worker handed them the key to an apartment. He clearly hadn't gone inside and likely had no desire to witness the horror unfolding there. The first thing the police saw was a large stain on the carpet. A bloody trail stretched from the leather sofa in the living room all the way to the hallway. They didn't touch or photograph anything yet, just surveyed the crime scene to understand what they were dealing with. The crimson trail led them from the living room down the hallway to one of the bedrooms. There, on the floor right at the entrance, lay the partially naked body of Kimberly Hill. Next to her head was a bloodied hammer with a wooden handle. It was absolutely clear that the woman was dead, and the cause was a head injury. This was evident from the gaping wound on the back of her head and the brain matter on the floor beside her. The police took several photographs. A blood-soaked pink hoodie on the sofa in the living room. A hairband with blood stains was caught in it. Nearby was a pink mobile phone. Obvious blood stains in the hallway, on the bathroom sink, on the countertop. All of this had to be carefully recorded and documented. But the most intriguing photographs taken by the police were of several notes left by the perpetrator. One of them was directly addressed to the officers. It read, "Catch me and sorry for the mess. Katia." Later, when the killer was caught, he would explain that he was just in a very playful mood at the time. But what alarmed the police most was another note left right at the apartment's entrance. It read, "Don't lose your head, she might still survive, though I doubt it." Hurry up. Desiree was the 23-year-old daughter of Kimberly Hill, the woman killed in her own apartment. Who could have done this? And why was this person now targeting the victim's daughter? Would the perpetrator reach Desiree before the police did? Kimberly Hill was born on March 28, 1963 in Oklahoma. She was described as a devoted, selfless mother and a proud corporal in the Marine Corps who served her country for 10 years. In 1990, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Desiree. After the birth of her baby, Kimberly decided not to return to the military. She took another job. In 1995, she had a son named Kevin. The child's father was not involved in his life, and all the responsibilities of raising the boy fell solely on the mother's shoulders. By 2014, Kevin and Kimberly were living in an apartment in a residential complex in Corpus Christi, Texas. Desiree, by then, was living separately with her boyfriend. Kimberly was a loving and caring woman, which extended to her professional life, as at the time of her death, she worked as a hospice caregiver. Everything seemed fine, but just a couple of days before her 51st birthday, on March 26, 2014, she died in her apartment in Corpus Christi, Texas. The fact that Kimberly didn't show up for work caused her colleagues to worry. Hill wasn't the type to be late or miss a shift without reason. She was a hard-working and responsible employee. If something unexpected had happened, Kimberly would have definitely informed her management. Hospice workers can tell many stories about their patients. Such stories often send chills down your spine, but for some, it's just part of the daily work environment. It's especially tough to deal with elderly people suffering from dementia. They can behave erratically, talk to non-existent people, and see things that aren't there. This was the environment where 50-year-old Kimberly Hill spent her days. When she didn't show up for her shift on March 27, 2014, her colleagues grew concerned. They first tried to reach her by phone, but when Kim didn't answer, they called the police and asked them to check if everything was okay at her home. Her colleagues had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Celeste, the hospice director, and another employee named Kathleen decided not to wait for the police to sort things out. They got in a car and drove to Kimberly's house to speak with their colleague in person. It was better than spending the whole day worrying and guessing what might have happened. Imagine their shock when, at Kim's house, they saw not one patrol car, but several. Police officers were bustling about, and a crowd of onlookers was already gathering. Celeste and Kathleen grew alarmed, but still didn't believe all this commotion was about Kimberly. The women didn't yet know that half an hour after their call to the police, another call came in to 911, prompting several patrol cars to head to Corpus Christi, Texas, where their colleague, Kimberly Hill, lived. A middle-aged couple, Timothy and Wanda, were drinking morning coffee. The clock showed 10 a.m. The last thing the couple expected at that moment was an uninvited guest at their doorstep. When the doorbell rang, the wife first looked out the window and saw a male figure. The stranger gestured for her to come out onto the porch. At that moment, Timothy, the homeowner, seeing his wife's hesitation, set his coffee cup on the table, walked to the door, and opened it. The strange visitor was short and very thin. His sparse mustache and thin-framed glasses made him look like a teenager who spent all his free time at a computer. The guy seemed harmless, even friendly. But after he said a couple of sentences, Wanda and Timothy froze in place. They stared at the young man, unable to comprehend what was happening. Their coffee had probably gone cold. The couple took turns clearing their throats, trying to cope with the flood of emotions. Then Timothy asked the stranger a few questions, but the answers were vague. So the homeowner decided to show hospitality and offered the guy something to drink. The strange visitor paused for a moment, then said that such kindness was unsettling because no one had spoken to him like that in a long time. Wanda, meanwhile, stepped into another room and made a phone call. Then she returned to her husband, and the three of them stood on the porch, staring down the quiet country road, waiting for the police cars to appear. The homeowners were so shocked by the young man's words that they now avoided meeting his eyes. The shock and awkwardness became almost palpable when, finally, a car with flashing lights pulled up, followed by a second one. Several armed officers jumped out. They pointed their guns at the guy and ordered him to raise his hands. He was immediately tackled to the ground, handcuffed, and taken to the car. The police cars had long driven away, but Timothy and Wanda sat on the couch in their home in silence, trying to process what the hell had just happened. That morning, a stranger appeared on their porch and asked to call 911. The thing was, he wanted to turn himself in because he had committed a horrific crime, taking someone's life. 23-year-old Desiree was brought into the interrogation room because her mother had died in her own apartment, and the perpetrator had left a message for the girl. As soon as the officers told her the news of her mother Kimberly Hill's death, Desiree slammed her hand on the table and screamed. Then she jumped up and began pacing the room like a wounded bird in a cage, unable to believe the monstrous truth. Desiree wasn't in town, so she didn't know about the attack. After the initial shock, the girl sat down, then jumped up again and rushed to her boyfriend, who was in the room. She was gasping for air, and it was unclear whether Desiree was about to faint or simply burst into tears. Her mother had died 2 days before her 51st birthday. It took the girl a few minutes to sit down and do everything she could. She had to answer the investigators' questions because every answer could be crucial. The detectives told Desiree that the perpetrator had left several notes before attacking her mother. One of them was addressed to the girl, and the police were concerned about the safety of the victim's daughter. Based on the notes, the perpetrator intended to kill Kimberly Hill first, then her daughter Desiree, and then leave town. The question was, why was the girl still alive? Why didn't the perpetrator come for her? The autopsy of Kimberly Hill focused primarily on the extensive blunt trauma to her head. The report stated that her skull was split in two. Additionally, there were multiple ruptures in her brain, mostly on the right side. To put it simply, the injuries were so severe that part of the brain matter had leaked out, and fragments of skull bones were caught in her hair. This could only have happened as a result of a powerful blow. One of the most alarming details in the entire autopsy was the softened brain tissue. The coroner got the impression that the victim's brain had been mashed like puree with a spoon, but those weren't the only injuries. The detective working on the case tried to get clear answers about the head injuries, likely clarifying some details in the case file. The person explaining to the investigator where the injuries were located was calm. He clearly showed where the blows were struck, and at that moment, the detective wasn't talking to the coroner. He was talking to the perpetrator. A young, skinny man in a black t-shirt and thin, metal-framed glasses sat at the table, propping his chin with his hand. The suspect's shoulders were relaxed. He felt no discomfort in front of the officers as he described the attack on 50-year-old Kimberly Hill. He admitted that he had never had a girlfriend, but now he was no longer a virgin. The guy smirked and even winked at the officers. Then he looked up, paused for a second, and shared his fantasies about the perfect crime. In his dreams, the guy would dress in a nice suit, sneak into a house, and first neutralize the homeowner. He would definitely bring a beautiful dress to put on his future victim, the lady of the house. As a child, the young man liked to strangle, but after that last mistake with Kimberly, he might have used something bigger, sharper, and more suitable for the job. After beheading the victim, he would take the head and sew it back on because he preferred to see his women not only dead, but also beautiful. The young man shared his grim fantasies with the officers, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Everything in this chilling confession suggested that the police were dealing with a serial killer in the making. Later, psychologists debated what the formal suit and fancy dress meant. In their view, the suit in the young man's fantasy represented a certain level of power and status, while dressing up the victims was actually a form of asserting control over their body and identity. The investigators in this case had to work with a significant amount of evidence. As mentioned earlier, the perpetrator left several notes at the scene. One of them addressed the police, challenging them to find and catch him. Another was addressed to Desiree, and in the third, the perpetrator wrote about himself. Notice of lifelong resignation, the third message began. The author wrote that he intended to keep his word, as he was still a man, albeit a funny one, and that he was tired of this life, with too much work and obligations. The perpetrator confessed that he had long dreamed of killing Desiree and Kimberly and then desecrating their bodies, and surely neither of the women had any idea about it. At the end of the letter, the guy apologized for the mess in the bathroom and wished both women luck in recovering from the shock. With respect or not, Kevin Josrael Davis. At the bottom of the letter was a small postscript. I once killed that stupid gray cat because I was bored, sorry. Kevin Josrael Davis was born on December 27, 1995. He was the biological son of Kimberly Hill and the half-brother of Desiree. His third letter was addressed to the mother he killed and his sister. The young man wrote that he was fed up with his own life and had considered taking his own life. Kevin had written this letter in advance, but then changed his mind and instead carried out the murder of his own mother. Now, sitting in the interrogation room in front of the detectives was 18-year-old 10th grader Kevin Davis. The young man showed no remorse for what he had done. He was calm. One hand rested on the armrest, the other casually propped up his chin. Sometimes Kevin gestured during the conversation, but he didn't seem nervous at all, just chatting with the officers and answering all their questions. During the conversation, Davis suddenly made a statement that left the detective stunned. This guy was undoubtedly strange, but what he told the law enforcement officers was beyond comprehension. Kevin said he had always loved his mother, but it was probably a different kind of love. And yes, he lost his virginity with a corpse. According to Davis, it all started when he asked his mother if he could kill himself that morning. He was bored with life. He didn't like living. Caught off guard by the strange question, Kimberly was taken aback. Like any mother worried about her child, she tried to talk her son out of it, but Kevin was insistent. Then Kimberly couldn't take it anymore and told her son that, well, he was a grown man, and she couldn't control his actions. In reality, the woman was desperate and didn't know what to do. She called her daughter and asked her to take Kevin. At that moment, the guy realized it was time to act, now or never. He changed his decision and, on a whim, wanted to take his mother's life. He sat down, wrote a plan to kill Kimberly and Desiree, imagining himself as a science fiction writer, and then simply carried it out. Kevin calmly told the police his version of events. Kimberly Hill, his mom, was sitting on the couch watching TV. Kevin ripped the cord from his gaming console, approached the woman from behind, and tried to strangle her. It didn't work. When Kimberly started screaming and resisting, he grabbed a hammer and struck her on the back of the head about 20 times until her skull split open. His mother pretended to be dead, but Kevin knew she was still alive because she was making snoring sounds. He dragged Kimberly's body to the bedroom and stabbed a knife into her head to make sure she was truly dead. Some said Kimberly died from the hammer blows. Others believed the fatal wound was from the knife. Either way, it was brutal, and as if one attack wasn't enough, Kevin also desecrated his mother's body. He left her naked from the waist down and positioned the body in a provocative pose. Since Davis had been a virgin until then, he decided to have intercourse with the woman, or rather, her corpse. Kevin said he had always been fascinated by death, though in his fantasies, it was more ceremonial and theatrical. Davis also revealed that the intimacy with his mother's dead body wasn't exactly his first experience. They had a gray cat named Claire. One day, the guy got bored, so he went and strangled the animal, then cut open its belly and placed his organ in the warm flesh. A dead cat. A dead woman. They excited Kevin. Intimate relationships with living people didn't interest him. He had no standards or morals. Any body, in Davis's view, was just a piece of meat, as crude as that sounds. Kevin looked at the officer in the interrogation room, and something didn't add up. This clearly wasn't the whole truth they wanted to hear. The police needed to determine whether this was a simple crime or a capital offense. In Texas, if Kevin simply killed his mother and then defiled her, it would be considered a regular crime. If he inflicted injuries on his victim and then sent her to the grave, it would be considered a capital offense. The difference lies in the aggravating circumstances. To sort out these nuances, the detectives asked Kevin clarifying questions. So, by the time he dragged Kimberly into the bedroom to attack her, was she already dead? According to the young man, she was making snoring-like sounds. At that moment, he decided to grab a steak knife from the kitchen and stir her brain. He moved the blade in the wound on her head and started digging into her skull. Then he stuck his hand in and felt the tactile sensations. According to the guy, the texture was like some kind of putty, and it tasted like pudding. Toward the end of the conversation, the officers asked Kevin if he regretted what he had done to his mother. The guy admitted that, in a way, he understood the strangeness of his actions. He wouldn't take them back. Kevin himself said that Kimberly was a wonderful mother and didn't deserve such a death. But the problem was that her son was a horrible, cruel, and disgusting person. The young man acknowledged that the problem lay with him. Initially, Kevin Davis planned to take the life of another family member, his sister. But at that moment, he was already satisfied with the murder of his mother, so he just decided to mess with Desiree a little. He left her a note suggesting that their mom might still survive, though he knew full well that Kimberly was dead. Desiree, in her brother's opinion, was a good, very sensitive person. He knew she would lose her mind when she read the note and decided to toy with his sister because he had such a sick sense of humor. Listening to the suspect's story, the officers thought he lived in some kind of world far removed from reality. But Kevin didn't consider himself mentally ill or crazy. He stated that he was in his right mind and knew exactly what he was doing. At the same time, he understood that, in a traditional sense, he was acting wrongly. At the end of the conversation, the young man paused for a moment, then told the officers that he enjoyed taking lives and would like to continue doing so. Since he had turned himself in to pay for his crime, he felt he should now tell the honest truth and not hide his fantasies. How did it happen that 18-year-old Kevin Davis, with the most horrific thoughts forming in his head, lived calmly in society? He went to school and no one noticed anything. Kimberly Hill complained to her close friends that she sometimes had problems with Kevin because he didn't like going to school, wanted to play video games, and came across as a loner with no friends, but that was it. His sister Desiree said that, although Kevin never showed aggression or cruelty toward anyone, he had severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADHD is a neurological disorder that affects a person's ability to focus, control impulses, and manage their behavior. A person with ADHD struggles to concentrate on one task, quickly loses interest, lacks control over their actions, and is emotionally unstable. The evening before the crime, Desiree spoke on the phone with her mother, who told her that she and Kevin had argued. It all started with an ad for some dating website. The son told his mother that she shouldn't have given up on love, to which the woman explained that, even if she wanted to, she couldn't bring a stranger into her home because she didn't live alone. Apparently, the guy didn't like something in her response. During the argument, Kevin was disrespectful and said many hurtful things. Unable to control himself during the verbal spat, the young man declared that he didn't care about his sister or mother, and even if they died, he wouldn't be upset. Desiree's intense reaction in the interrogation room mentioned earlier wasn't about her mother's death. The girl already knew her mom had died. She was shocked that Kimberly's life was taken by her own son, Desiree's brother. When Desiree calmed down a bit, she told the detectives that when Kevin was little, he often drew gruesome things. For example, someone shooting people, pools of blood, and scattered body parts. No one understood where such fantasies came from in a child's mind without any apparent reason. However, there were no signs in the past that Kevin was prone to violence. He and his sister often argued and yelled at each other, but he never hit her. Even when he was angry, he didn't allow himself to resort to physical violence. Kevin himself said he never told anyone about his plans, about what he wanted to do to his mom and sister. But for years, there were hints of it. As a child, he admitted, he was much dumber and far more irritable. He even tried talking about his fantasies, but people brushed him off. The family overlooked such things or tried not to pay attention to them. And then, at some point, his dark desires overpowered his common sense and came to the surface. The young man saw a motive for killing his mother in an ordinary argument, and then, if everything went according to his plan, he wanted to deal with his sister too, but ultimately decided it was too much and abandoned the idea. Many people didn't understand why Davis turned himself in and why he decided not to touch his sister. But it later turned out that Desiree lived with her boyfriend, who could likely have protected her from her deranged brother. And Kevin didn't want his plan to fail because of a boyfriend who was probably physically stronger than him. The crime took place at 8 a.m., after which the young man took a shower as he was covered in his mother's blood. He grabbed a bicycle and rode around the streets all night. Initially, he planned to leave town. He fled the crime scene on his bike, leaving several handwritten notes to taunt the investigators and mess with Desiree. Davis thought his sister would come first. He didn't know that Kimberly's colleagues would be the first to raise the alarm about her absence from work. The fresh night air had a productive effect on Kevin. Sincerely realizing that his chances of escape were slim, he changed his plans after a while. The young man abandoned his bicycle near the railroad tracks, walked to the nearest house in the suburbs, and told the couple living there, Timothy and Wanda, that he had killed someone. Kevin asked to use their phone to call 911 and report his crime. The guy was very calm throughout the entire scene while standing on the porch of Timothy and Wanda's house. He even told them about his nighttime bike ride, how he zigzagged through the streets with no idea where to go. While Timothy talked to the uninvited guest who claimed he had taken someone's life and now wanted to be arrested, Wanda stepped into another room and called emergency services. The woman told the dispatcher that someone had just knocked on their door and reported a crime. Wanda was surprisingly composed. She hadn't fully grasped whether the young man was telling the truth or pulling some kind of prank. And as the three of them waited for the police to arrive, fear settled in her heart. It seemed to her that the young man was under the influence of some illegal substances because he was too calm and indifferent to everything. To pass the time while waiting for the police, Timothy asked Kevin why he had committed the crime. The guy gave many reasons, but none were specific. That day, Timothy was supposed to be at work, but he had taken the day off. Many believe that if the man hadn't been home, Kevin Davis might have committed another crime. It seems that due to his build, he feared physical confrontation with other men. He liked taking advantage of people who were vulnerable to him. Kimberly loved her son and didn't expect him to attack her. Wanda was petite, and if she had been home alone, Kevin might have tried to take her life. He simply didn't have the courage to take on both homeowners. Kevin told the investigators that he had started feeling these dark urges long ago, since he was 10 years old. He and his family never sought medical help, and he just accepted it as part of himself. He wasn't ashamed of being different. Many serial offenders had difficult childhoods, abuse, and mistreatment in their families. But Kevin said his mom, Kimberly, was the best mom and hadn't done anything wrong to him. On a bookshelf in her room was a photo frame, and instead of a picture, Kim had placed a note from her son. "Take it out early to make your day easier. Love you, see you after school, Kevin." It was probably the most tender handwritten message her son had ever left. Kimberly was so touched by her child's words that she decided to keep the note as a keepsake. Because of all this, the woman's death caused even greater horror and confusion. As mentioned, Kevin had no friends. He spent all his free time at home on the computer. His search history included terms like torture and intimate fantasies involving corpses. Some video files and images on this topic were saved in a separate folder. After everything Kevin had done, he didn't expect people to understand or forgive him. He knew he might spend the rest of his life in prison or possibly face the death penalty. But he was ready for it and even told the investigators that he deserved 100 years in prison. At least, That's how the young man reasoned in the interrogation room when talking to the detectives. The district attorney offered Kevin Davis a 60-year prison sentence as part of a plea deal, but he rejected it. Either Kevin and his lawyer thought he'd get a shorter sentence with a jury trial, or there was some other reason. As a result of a psychiatric evaluation, Kevin was diagnosed with a personality disorder, but he was ultimately deemed sane. The specialist stated that the young man fully understood the difference between right and wrong when he attacked his own mother, so there was no medical justification or explanation for his actions. During the trial, the jury was shown a recording of the interrogation where the defendant confessed to, arguably, the most heinous crimes one could commit against their own mother. When the video ended, Kevin turned in his chair to face the members of the grand jury and gave them a wide smile. During her testimony at the trial, Desiree told her brother about her feelings. The whole time, he just shrugged and sighed dramatically, as if listening to a lecture from his older sister about bad behavior. Kimberly's father, Kevin's grandfather, said that his grandson had taken the life of the only person who supported him, and now he would be left all alone. In response, the guy merely cracked his knuckles and smiled. When witnesses spoke, Kevin waved at them and smiled warmly, as if the case wasn't about him at all. It took the jury less than an hour to reach their verdict. Kevin Davis was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but will be eligible for parole in March 2044. The young man is held in a facility focused on the psychiatric issues of inmates. Many people condemn Kevin's crime, but some blame Kimberly. In their view, when her son told her he wanted to kill himself, she did nothing to stop him. That, they believe, was the cause of the crime. It's strange that some don't see the cause in Kevin himself and fail to understand that he embodies true evil. But can prison reform a person who raised a hand against his own mother? Will Kevin Davis be a danger to society if he's ever released? And do the jurors realize that one day they might come face to face with this man? Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The last time Tara Lynn Grant was seen alive was in her luxurious home in Washington Township. The 34-year-old woman, who held a managerial position at a well-known company and was a happy mother of two, vanished without a trace after a family argument. Today's story began on February 20th, 2007, in southeast Michigan. That day, a local resident was strolling through the park's pathways when she stumbled upon something horrific. Behind the branches of a tree, caught in a crevice in the bark, was a plastic bag. Curiosity got the better of her, and the woman decided to see what was inside. When the bag was in her hands, she immediately noticed dried drops that looked like blood. The accidental witness placed the bag on the ground and called the police station. Being part of the local community, she had an idea of what this might be connected to. The town had heard about the disappearance of 34-year-old Tara Lynn Grant. The local woman's walk in the park and her alarming discovery became the catalyst for the police to conduct a more thorough search of the area. As a result, detectives found several parts of the missing woman's body scattered across different corners of the park. So, who was Tara Lynn Grant, and why were her remains scattered in the wooded area like unwanted trash? Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Tara Lynn was born in Macomb County, Michigan on June 28, 1972. She was one of two daughters of Gerald and Mary Dist. Tara was very close to her sister Alicia, and over the years, they became not just sisters, but best friends. Bright and cheerful Tara, with her dark curly hair and wide smile, not only excelled academically, but also found time for extracurricular activities. She played basketball and performed on the cheerleading squad. Having spent her childhood on a farm in Michigan, Tara dreamed of getting an education, becoming financially independent, and making a name for herself. After graduating high school, she immediately enrolled in a community college, then transferred to Michigan State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in business. Soon after, Tara landed a job as a consultant at Washington Group International, a company that provided comprehensive engineering, construction, and management services to businesses and governments worldwide. This was a completely different lifestyle for a girl who grew up on a farm in a small town. Just recently, Tara, along with her parents and sister, would wake up at sunrise to feed the livestock. And now she had burst into the world of big business, landing her dream job. The company's headquarters were in San Francisco, with offices scattered across the globe, so Tara's job allowed her to travel to different countries. Wasn't this the dream come true for a country girl? Tara set a goal for herself and achieved it. She succeeded not only in business, but also in love. Her chosen partner, Stephen Grant, was about 2 years older. He had also once attended Michigan State University, but didn't finish his studies. A good job opportunity came his way, and Stephen decided that education could wait. Eventually, the young man began working with a politician in Michigan. In reality, Stephen and Tara had a lot in common, but at their first meeting, the guy didn't make much of an impression on her. She was an attractive, educated young career woman, while he was an ordinary, clumsy guy who didn't exactly shine with intelligence. Classmates even joked that if Stephen ever robbed someone, he'd probably leave his ID at the crime scene. To seem more respectable, Stephen craved attention, often lied and made up stories about himself. Tara, as if sensing the deceit, immediately made it clear that she wasn't interested in further communication, but this had the opposite effect. Stephen refused to take no for an answer and kept pursuing her. In the end, his persistence paid off. A sudden tragedy struck Tara's family. Her grandmother passed away. Stephen seized the opportunity. When Tara flew back to her hometown, the young man unexpectedly showed up at the funeral. He made an hours-long trip to Tara's hometown to be by her side during this difficult time. It was a bit awkward because Tara was dating another guy at the time who was also present at the farewell ceremony. But Stephen endured the uncomfortable moment and even joined Tara's family for dinner, where they offered him a place to stay for the night. Showing respect, he declined the offer and returned home. This gesture became a turning point in Stephen and Tara's relationship. After some time, Tara softened and gave the young man the green light after breaking up with her boyfriend. Everything happened quickly. Stephen and Tara started dating, then confessed their love for each other, and within a few months, they began living together. Grant knew he'd never find another woman like Tara, so he did everything to win her heart, and then hurriedly proposed to her on the steps of the Detroit Institute of Arts. They married in 1996, and in 2000, Tara gave birth to their daughter Lindsay, followed by their son Ian in 2002. By 2007, the family of 4 had settled in a new, prestigious neighborhood. The Grants bought a large house with 4 bedrooms, a huge yard, and a garage for their cars, and their children attended a private school. Financially, things were going quite well. Most of the family's income came from Tara. She was the primary breadwinner. Stephen, having lost his initial job in politics, started working part-time at his father's tool and paint store. He looked after the children since Tara frequently traveled for work. This is a perfectly normal arrangement when the wife earns more. But not every man is willing to take on household duties and child-rearing, and unfortunately, Stephen was one of them. Over time, it began to irritate Grant that his wife had earned a college degree and put in maximum effort to climb the career ladder. He didn't care that Tara was earning money for their family, that thanks to her, they could afford a beautiful home in a good neighborhood and provide their children with a quality education. Stephen's pride was wounded, and he complained to friends and relatives at every opportunity that his wife didn't support or appreciate him. It was hard for Stephen to cope with the fact that his wife was successful. This knowledge weighed on his male ego. What bothered him most was that Tara had to travel extensively for work, especially over the last 4 years. As a result, he had to take on most of the parenting responsibilities, which was indeed challenging. However, Stephen didn't even try to find a higher-paying job to contribute more to the family budget. It got to the point where Tara was away on business 5 days a week. Lately, she had been working in Puerto Rico, coming home only on weekends to spend time with her husband and children. Yet, she called home every day, sent gifts, and left heartfelt notes for her husband and kids. She wasn't physically present, but every spare moment, she thought of her family. Although the Grants appeared to be a successful, happy couple from the outside, there was a silent power struggle between the spouses in their home. Stephen was the head of the family, while Tara was the main breadwinner. This fact alone challenged her husband's masculinity. People who knew the couple closely noticed some oddities in Stephen's character. For example, he was a very controlling person, so Tara often gave in to him during arguments. She knew that fights and scandals wouldn't lead to anything good, so she bit her tongue and agreed, letting her husband feel like he had won. Deep down, Stephen knew that Tara was actually the head of the family, which made him angry and resentful toward her. To somehow fix the situation and boost his male ego, Grant started messaging his ex-girlfriends. He complained to them about his wife and how she was never home. He constantly suspected Tara of cheating and believed she was having an affair with her boss. He even installed some kind of spyware on his wife's computer to monitor her emails. He wanted proof of her infidelity, but there was none, nor could there be, because Tara loved her husband. If her boss sent work-related messages on weekends, Stephen would get nervous and they'd argue again. While accusing his wife of every mortal sin, the man himself was far from perfect. When messaging his exes, he'd first complain about the hardships of family life, then start flirting and making suggestive remarks. When asked why he didn't just divorce if he was so unhappy with his wife, Stephen always said he didn't want to destroy the family or ruin his children's lives. With the woman constantly absent, things at home were going awry, even though the children were getting older. They were 6 and 4 at the time. Stephen, who was responsible for running the household, was exhausted. Since they had the money, Tara didn't mind hiring a housekeeper to take some of the burden off her husband and give him more time for rest and hobbies. They decided to hire a live-in nanny who would also help with household chores. Since Stephen would be interacting closely with this person, he took it upon himself to interview the candidates and choose a suitable one. Naturally, his choice mostly fell on young, attractive women. That's how 18-year-old Verena Dierks came to live in the Grants' home. Verena was from Germany. She had just graduated high school and came to America looking for work. As a foreigner, Verena did her best to seize the opportunity presented to her. What followed unfolded like a typical scenario. A grown man, tired of loneliness, and a young, alluring girl quickly grew close. They were in the same household space 5 days a week. At first, Stephen flirted and acted somewhat inappropriately, complaining about his wife and claiming she was cheating on him. Then he offered the tired girl a massage. In the blink of an eye, the homeowner and the nanny ended up in bed together, and a full-fledged intimate relationship began between them. All this happened a month and a half before the horrific events that took place in the Grant family. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2007, Stephen Grant called the police and reported that his wife Tara was missing. In his statement, he claimed that his 34-year-old wife had left home before, leaving him alone with the kids. That's why he didn't immediately report her disappearance. The last time Grant saw Tara was on Friday, February 9th, when she returned from her business trip in Puerto Rico. She started unpacking her things and announced that this time she'd have to leave a day earlier. Usually, Tara spent weekends with her family and returned to her work duties on Monday. But that day, she said she'd leave on Sunday. Naturally, this upset Stephen. His wife had just returned and was already talking about leaving again. The couple argued. The second reason for his resentment was a simple request from Tara. The previous weekend, she had asked her husband to pick up her car from the auto shop. This innocent request made Stephen feel like a servant, a handyman. He didn't hear respect in his wife's words, and as a result, they argued even more. Tara grabbed her unpacked bags left the bedroom and, talking to someone on the phone, walked out to the driveway. Then Stephen saw her get into a dark car waiting for her outside the house and drive off into the night in an unknown direction. No one saw her again. Grant was both angry and upset. He had to tell the kids that their mom, whom they'd been waiting to see all week, had left without even visiting them. In the first few days, Stephen wasn't worried. He was used to his wife never being home. The next day, he called her parents, and they reassured him, saying that Tara had probably gone back to Puerto Rico. But then he got a call from her company saying that Tara had missed an important meeting. This was very unlike her, as the woman was endlessly dedicated to her job. Despite the alarming call from Tara's office, Stephen didn't contact the police that same day. He waited until the next evening when 5 days had passed since her disappearance, and only then filed a missing person report. In reality, he didn't seem particularly concerned that Tara wasn't in touch. Unlike Stephen, Tara's sister, Alicia, immediately dropped everything and flew to the Grants' home to be with her brother-in-law and the kids. She launched an active effort to find her sister. She called friends and acquaintances and put up flyers. Stephen, however, took absolutely no part in the search. He officially stated this through his attorney. Even when the police suggested they were likely looking for a body rather than a living person, Grant stuck to his stance. Concerned citizens scoured the area on foot, searched hard-to-reach terrain with ATVs and helicopters, and brought dogs. The police and volunteers didn't lose hope of finding the missing woman, alive or dead. The day after Tara was reported missing, the police stopped Grant and arrested him for driving with an expired license. The man accused the authorities of using the traffic stop as a pretext to take him into custody and question him about his wife's disappearance. During the conversation, the investigators didn't believe the story Stephen told. Beyond visible injuries, like a mark on his nose and scratches on his hands, the man's behavior raised suspicions. Grant was very nervous during the police interview, constantly fidgeting in his chair, and the longer they questioned him about his relationship with his wife, the more agitated he became. While his answers seemed logical enough, there was something off about Stephen's demeanor. His story didn't quite add up because Tara had vanished in every sense. She wasn't using her phone, credit, or debit cards, hadn't bought transportation tickets, and hadn't left the country. According to Grant, she got into a dark car and drove off in an unknown direction, only to seemingly vanish into thin air. There was another oddity that didn't quite match Stephen's story. He told the detectives that before leaving, his wife was talking to someone on the phone. The investigators checked the woman's phone records and found that Tara hadn't called anyone, nor had anyone called her. It turned out this phone call was a foolish fabrication. After her disappearance, only Stephen left a few voicemails on his wife's phone, and that was it. The deeper the officers delved into the investigation, the more suspicions they had about Grant, as he became increasingly uncooperative. He stopped answering the investigators' questions and refused to take a polygraph test. At least, he refused to take it at the police station, promising to do so with an independent polygraph examiner. Stephen got angry and called his attorney. Grant's distrust and refusal to cooperate with law enforcement could be tied to the fact that he knew far more than he told the police. Nevertheless, Stephen was released on bail. Over the next 2 weeks, Grant appeared in the media multiple times, sometimes accusing the authorities of harassment. As mentioned earlier, Stephen didn't participate in the search for his wife, but tried to create the appearance that he cared about Tara. Refusing to cooperate with the police, he hired a private investigator to gather as much information as possible and try to figure out what might have happened to his wife. That was the only thing the husband did. He didn't even bother to call the detectives to check on the investigation's progress. During Tara's search, the sheriff's office held daily press conferences. Meanwhile, Stephen Grant continued to engage with the media, trying to portray himself in a positive light to the public. He cried on camera and pleaded for his wife's return. He spoke about what a good wife Tara was while simultaneously trying to tarnish her reputation by saying he had replaced their mother for the kids. To outsiders, His tears looked very fake. When Tara's family said something positive about her, Stephen immediately contradicted it. It wasn't entirely clear whether he was trying to justify himself to the public or smear the name of the missing woman. At that point, Stephen was the police's main and only suspect. They put him under surveillance. The detectives were also troubled by the fact that Grant wouldn't allow a full search of the family home without a warrant. After Tara was declared missing, the housekeeper, Verena Dirks, spoke with the detectives investigating the case. However, she kept quiet about her affair with Stephen, fearing the consequences. The girl had developed feelings for her employer and believed his explanations about the marital argument, so she wanted to protect the man at all costs. Verena left the Grants' home and returned to her native Germany on February 21st, but despite her departure, she maintained secret contact with Stephen. That continued until a major breakthrough in the case. One day, on a cold February day, a woman walking in the park noticed a bag hidden behind branches in a crevice in the bark. Inside were gloves and metal shavings, and the bag itself had noticeable blood-like stains. It was later determined that the blood belonged to the missing Tara Lynn Grant, confirming the police's suspicion that they were looking for a body, not a living person, though at the time this was only their hunch. After the alarming discovery in the tree trunk, the police decided to conduct a large-scale search of the park's territory to possibly find other evidence. At the same time, they obtained a warrant to search the Grants' residence in Washington Township, Michigan. So, on the evening of March 2, 2007, 3 weeks after Tara's disappearance, the police arrived at Stephen's home with the intent to conduct a thorough search. The homeowner, taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't yet been arrested, took the dog and went for a walk. As soon as Stephen was out of the police's sight, he called a friend and asked for a ride. The friend noticed that Grant looked shaken, but attributed his state to the unpleasant situation with the home search. In reality, Stephen was losing his mind for an entirely different reason. While inspecting the garage, the police noticed a large green bag next to a box full of children's toys. Inside was a plastic bag with unknown contents wrapped in several layers of plastic. One of the officers touched the bundle and felt something soft. When law enforcement officers pulled out the bulky object and unwrapped the plastic, they saw human remains before them. It was a torso, a fragment of a body from the neck to the upper thighs. The body still had clothing on it. The detectives immediately realized they were looking at the remains of the missing Tara Lynn Grant, hidden in a tarp bag next to her children's toys. The suspected perpetrator could easily escape, as the police had no legal grounds to detain Stephen Grant until then, and if he decided to flee now, it would take time to find him. Upon discovering Tara's partial remains in the family home's garage, the detectives rushed to obtain an arrest warrant for Grant. Meanwhile, Stephen borrowed a car from a friend and drove to his sister's house, where his children, 6-year-old Lindsay and 4-year-old Ian, were staying. Grant said goodbye to his kids, spoke with his sister, and, as expected, went on the run. The sheriff's office held another press conference, during which they urged Stephen to return voluntarily and turn himself in. But those who knew Grant didn't believe this would happen. His own attorney stated that Stephen was planning to take his own life. According to the lawyer, Grant was desperate and couldn't even speak coherently when he called him. After Tara's death, 2 wonderful children were left behind, whose lives would forever be marked by their father's horrific actions. The poor kids were at the center of attention for relatives on both sides. Both Tara's family and Stephen's relatives wanted to shield the children from what was happening around them. Everyone knew their mother was gone forever, and their father was on the run, but the kids weren't told. Keeping the horror unfolding in the family a secret was incredibly difficult, as reporters kept knocking on doors, eager for interviews. Relatives even hung a sign at the entrance to the house, stating that children were sleeping inside and asking not to disturb them. While the authorities were searching for Stephen, they also needed to find the rest of Tara's body, as only her torso was found in the garage. First, the detectives decided to inspect the park where the blood-stained bag was found and where Tara often went to play with her children on weekends. The police checked every inch of the area, and it didn't take long for them to discover parts of the woman's body hidden in shallow graves. Grant didn't seem to have tried very hard to conceal them. Unfortunately, some remains were never found, and others bore traces of animal bites. 2 days later, by tracing a phone call when Stephen dialed his sister's number, the police caught the suspect 224 miles from the crime scene in a state park in northern Michigan. Grant wasn't on the run for long. He was found early in the morning on March 4th. The man was lying under a tree without shoes or outer clothing. His shirt and pants were soaking wet. He was in a semi-conscious state, on the brink between life and death. After reaching the park by car, Stephen had walked through the snow for 10 hours. He had taken alcohol and pills from his sister's house, intending to end his life. He also bought a toy gun, hoping to be shot by police if they found him before he succumbed to hypothermia. The man planned to point the weapon at law enforcement to provoke return fire. After his arrest, Grant was airlifted to a hospital for treatment of frostbite and hypothermia. As soon as the man regained consciousness, he gave a full confession while still in his hospital bed. But it was a confession the police had already heard. On March 3rd, Stephen had called his housekeeper and nanny, Verena Dirks, and told her he had taken his wife Tara's life. He claimed it was an accident, but after this confession, Verena decided to cut all ties with him. That same day, Dirks reported her suitor to the detective leading the investigation. When the time came, she flew from Germany to testify against him in court. According to Stephen, he and his wife had a serious argument on the evening of February 9th, 2007. He was already in a bad mood and angry at Tara before the conversation even started, as he was tired of staying home and caring for the kids. As soon as the topic of his wife's next business trip came up, Stephen got seriously angry. He was already lying in bed, undressed, while Tara was unpacking her suitcase. She mentioned that she'd have to go to Puerto Rico a day earlier because her direct supervisor was arriving there. When her husband heard about the boss, something snapped in him. He shouted at Tara to go to her lover right now. At one point, the woman did try to leave to avoid provoking her husband, but he grabbed her arm. Tara slapped him in the face in response, and Stephen pushed her in the back so hard that she fell to the floor and hit her head. Now Tara was angry and said she'd had enough, that she was tired of this relationship. The wife planned to file for divorce and leave her husband penniless and without the kids, as she was the one earning money and supporting the family. Her words struck Stephen so deeply that he sat on top of Tara, who was lying on the floor, and began strangling her with his bare hands. The woman resisted, but he was physically stronger. While Grant squeezed the throat of his once-beloved wife, he couldn't even look her in the eyes, so he grabbed a shirt and covered her face with it. As soon as Stephen realized his wife was dead, he panicked. All this time, his children were at home, sleeping in their beds, and their nanny, Verena, wasn't home yet, but could return any minute. Stephen texted the housekeeper, asking her not to come home that day, and then tried to move his wife's body. However, the burden was too heavy for him. So, Grant left the room, grabbed one of his belts, wrapped it around Tara's neck, and dragged the lifeless body down the stairs to the garage to put it in the car. At one point, he dropped the body, and there was a dull thud. According to Stephen, it sounded like a cracked watermelon. As soon as he got his wife into the car, Grant heard a noise. Despite his request not to come home, Verena had returned because she had nowhere else to go. Disheveled and half-dressed, Stephen ran out to meet her. A fresh cut from his fight with Tara was visible on his face. He told the nanny that he'd argued with his wife, that she'd slapped him and left. That was the story he told Verena, and then he tried to cover his tracks by repeatedly calling Tara's number, leaving voicemails, and asking what he should tell the kids about her departure. All the while, he knew full well that his wife's dead body was in his car. He also took Verina's phone and started deleting their messages, knowing that an affair could look like a motive for the crime. The next day, Stephen took Tara's remains to his father's workshop at the tool and paint store, making sure no one was there. He spread out a tarp and, after drinking some alcohol for courage, began dismembering the body. During the process, he was sick to his stomach several times. Stephen divided the body into 14 parts and then destroyed all the items his wife had taken on her business trip to create the impression that she had left of her own accord. After finishing, the man returned home and acted as if nothing had happened. Once he calmed down a bit, Grant decided to dispose of the remains. He placed the bag containing the carefully packed body parts on his children's sled and headed to a park a couple of kilometers from the house. Then something unexpected happened. Stephen climbed a hill and suddenly lost control of the sled. It slid down the slope, the bag fell, and the contents spilled onto the ground. The perpetrator had to rush after the sled, carrying his wife's dead body, frantically gathering the scattered bags and stuffing them back into the bag before anyone saw. Then he finally disposed of his wife's remains. He simply went to a densely wooded area, dug a couple of shallow graves, and tossed the bags in, hoping animals would take care of the rest. But Stephen's plans changed when a random woman in the park found a bag with blood-stained items. He realized the police were planning a large-scale search of the area. Panicking, he retrieved his wife's torso and hid it in the garage next to his children's toys. Stephen knew that without a warrant, the detectives couldn't search his property, so he felt safe. But the next day, the police arrived at his home with a search warrant. Stephen Grant was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. His attorney, who had previously tried to defend him, recused himself. At Tara's funeral, her husband's name, responsible for the tragedy, was never mentioned. No one wanted to say it aloud. Tara Lynn knew how to love and be loved, was capable of forgiving, believing, and understanding. Her mistake was trusting the wrong man, failing to recognize his vile and envious nature. In February 2008, Stephen Grant was sentenced to 50 to 80 years in prison for the manslaughter of Tara Lynn Grant. He also received a 6 to 10-year sentence for mutilation of a body. The more success Tara achieved, the more insignificant Stephen felt. He simply couldn't come to terms with it, whining, complaining about his wife, and cheating on her with the young housekeeper just to bolster his shaken ego. Now, because of his despicable, selfish actions, the children lost both their parents overnight. The crime Grant committed against his wife had no less tragic consequences. In June 2008, a few months after Stephen was found guilty, his father, William Allen Grant, took his own life. The man owned the tool store where his son had dismembered his wife's body. He couldn't bear what his grown son had done and shot himself. Thus, Stephen was indirectly responsible for his father's death as well. Both children took their aunt's last name, abandoning the Grant surname. They had some idea of what happened to their mother, but didn't know the details. Tara's family stated that they would allow her 2 children to read their father's confession once they reached adulthood. The relatives wanted to shield the kids from the bitter truth as long as possible, as their entire world had already been turned upside down. But in reality, things were far worse. As it turned out, 6-year-old Lindsay and 4-year-old Ian witnessed their mother's murder. They stayed silent about it until the trial was over, and only then confided in their aunt and uncle, recounting how they saw their mom and dad arguing that night. Then they had to watch as Tara took her last breath. When Stephen left the room, Lindsay ran to her mother's body and tried to wake her, not yet understanding that she was dead. When her father returned to the bedroom, the girl hid under the bed, witnessing the lifeless body of her mother being dragged to the door. Will Stephen Grant realize what he's done while rotting in prison for the rest of his days? If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. It was a sunny spring day when 18-year-old Julie Connell decided to spend time in the park with her favorite book in hand. She was an honor student, a loving sister, and an ambitious girl with a bright future. But when her family came to pick her up, Julie was no longer there. She had vanished forever. Imagine a high school senior who is a role model for everyone. She's smart, composed, always has an opinion on any matter, and many look up to her. That's exactly who Julie N. Connell was. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Julie was born on April 15, 1966, and was the eldest daughter of Jim and Kathy Connell. The family lived in San Leandro, California, a city located in the eastern part of the San Francisco Bay Area. It was the kind of place where families felt safe, leaving their doors unlocked. The city streets were lined with well-kept lawns, and children played in the yards. Here and there, neighbors exchanged greetings. The city's population had grown significantly over the past few decades, reaching over 60,000 in the 1980s. The Connell family home was an oasis of love and mutual respect. They lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood, and Julie fully embraced this stability, focusing entirely on her studies and passions. She was a diligent student, and at the same time possessed a quiet determination and a spark in her eyes that made people take notice of her. Julie was an honor student at Royal High School. Not only did her teachers adore her, but her classmates saw her as a sincere, kind person they could always rely on. Her younger sisters, Wendy and Patricia, practically idolized Julie. School wasn't the only thing that interested the teenager. Connell loved reading, writing, and performing on stage. She dreamed of becoming a television host in the future. Julie had a boyfriend, Tom O'Neill. He was slightly older than her and already in college. The young couple spent a lot of time together, enjoying each other's company. When Julie turned 18, it was a huge milestone for her. 18 is the age when you start to feel like an adult. Connell had already bought her cap and gown for graduation and paid for a class trip to Disneyland. On April 15th, her birthday, Julie spent the day with her boyfriend, Tom. Just a few months earlier, she had been accepted to California State University in Hayward. She had big plans, and no one doubted she would achieve them all. Julie was simply brilliant. She devoted a lot of time to charity and caring for others, volunteering at the local church, and reading Bible stories to children. Her family and friends, everyone who knew Julie closely, were certain she was on the cusp of great accomplishments. Of course, Connell was just an ordinary high school senior, someone's sister, friend, and daughter. That's why the story of what happened to her touches the heart so deeply. She simply lived her life, believing a wonderful future awaited her. A future that everyone, including her, has a right to. Julie could hardly have imagined the horror that awaited her in one of the city's safest places. On April 20th, 1984, during the Easter weekend, the weather was beautiful. The Connell family planned to spend the day together. Kathy, the mother, wanted to take her 3 daughters to the movies to see Police Academy. But it turned out Julie had already seen the film, so she had slightly different plans. While her sisters, 15-year-old Wendy and 12-year-old Patricia, laughed at the comedy and ate popcorn with their mom, Julie decided to use the time for reading. College was just around the corner, and she wasn't about to slack off, especially with a test scheduled for Monday. The girl took everything she needed: the book she was reading, water, a blanket, and a small snack. Then she put on her favorite lavender shirt, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes to be comfortable lying on the ground. Kennedy Park was right across the street from the movie theater, the perfect place to stretch out on the grass and enjoy a good book. Julie asked her mom to pick her up after the movie ended. She got out of the car around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Her family had no idea they were seeing her alive for the last time. In the park, Julie found a comfortable spot, spread out her blanket, pulled out her book, and dove into reading. Her sister Wendy hung out nearby for a bit, waiting for the movie to start. The park was calm and peaceful. The sun was shining and it was full of people relaxing. But when the movie ended and Kathy returned to the park with the girls, Julie was gone. At first, they didn't think much of it. Maybe she went to grab a snack or got bored. Perhaps the high schooler had gone home early. Just to be safe, Kathy walked through the entire park, calling Julie's name. But neither Julie, her blanket, nor her book was anywhere to be found. When they got home, Kathy expected to see Julie and hear an explanation for why she hadn't waited for her sisters and mom. But the house was quiet, and her daughter wasn't there. With each passing minute, their anxiety grew. Jim Connell came home from work, initially angry, then nervous. This behavior was unlike his eldest daughter. Their shared worry soon turned to fear that something had happened to Julie. The parents called all her classmates and spoke to her boyfriend, Tom, but no one had seen her or had any idea where she might have gone. Then the Connells started calling local hospitals, hoping for any news about their child, but that was fruitless too. Julie had simply vanished in broad daylight. When Jim and Kathy went to the police, they were told the worst possible news. Since Julie had just turned 18, the authorities couldn't accept a missing person report for at least 72 hours because she was now considered an adult. 72 hours is an eternity when someone you love goes missing. The first 24 hours are critical for finding someone alive. With each passing hour, the chances diminish. As is often the case, law enforcement assumed the high schooler had run away from home or was simply out having fun, losing track of time. But the Connells knew their Julie wasn't reckless. She would never make her parents worry without reason. It was all terribly wrong. Naturally, the mother, father, and sisters couldn't sit idly by and do nothing. So they did what any desperate family would do. The Connells organized their own search party, printing over 2,000 flyers and posting them all over the city, begging for help. They scoured Kennedy Park, every street, every corner of their city, hoping to find any clue. On Easter Sunday morning, the Connells went to church, seeking some comfort. During the service, Jim felt something deeply unsettling. A cold, heavy wave of despair washed over him, shaking him to his core. It was like a voice whispering that Julie would never come home. At that moment, the man said nothing to anyone, still hoping for a positive outcome. But deep down, he already knew his little girl was no longer alive. The family continued their search. They had no other choice. They had to find Julie, no matter the cost. What started as an ordinary spring day turned into a nightmare for the Connell family. They lived in constant fear as time dragged on. By the third day, they were running on pure adrenaline and desperate hope. Julie had been missing for 72 hours. 3 full days of searching parks, knocking on doors, and making late-night calls, pleading for anyone who might have seen her. 3 days of replaying every detail in their minds, wondering what they had missed. Finally, the police agreed to start an investigation, but their initial response was cold, detached, and far too casual. They said the girl was probably just out with friends. The authorities brushed off the search, as if Julie had gone to an unplanned party and there was no need to worry so much. But the Connells were certain that wasn't the case. While other families prepared Easter dinner, they ran around the city, handing out flyers. Julie's face was now everywhere. In store windows, on telephone booths, even on car windshields. Her father, Jim, appeared on local television, pleading with the public for help. The search wasn't just the family's effort. The entire community came together to find the missing girl. Strangers with flashlights combed every corner of Kennedy Park and nearby areas. Psychics performed rituals to see what had happened to Julie. Search dogs tried to pick up the girl's scent. It was a whirlwind of effort, but it yielded no results. Then the first clue emerged. After seeing news reports about Julie's disappearance, a woman called the police. She thought she had found something important. It was a book, discarded in the bushes near her porch. The very book Julie had taken to the park, marked with the stamp of the school library where Julie went. The woman couldn't understand how the book ended up near her house. Before detectives could address this, another call came in. Another woman, walking with her daughter near the park, noticed a lavender shirt and a bra. The items were just lying on the street. Unfortunately, the shirt looked like the one Julie was wearing. The bra was cut in the middle, its straps torn. These clues suggested something terrible had happened to the girl. When the police brought the shirt and bra to the Connells' home, Kathy and Jim were afraid to even look. The torn fabric could only mean their daughter was in trouble and they couldn't help her. The realization was terrifying, but the parents weren't about to give up until they found Julie. Jim and Kathy still believed their child was alive. 2 days later, 2 teenage girls reported another crucial detail. They found the missing girl's backpack under a payphone near a store. The schoolgirls admitted they had rummaged through the backpack looking for something valuable. They were driving and throwing out items they didn't need from the window. When they heard about Julie Connell on the news and learned she had a backpack, they told their older sister, who advised them to call the police. Each of these clues was like another breadcrumb, a glimmer of hope mixed with fear. Then, 5 days after Julie's disappearance, on April 25th, the call the parents dreaded came. A farmer and his wife were herding cattle in a remote part of Castro Valley, about 20 minutes from Kennedy Park, where Julie was last seen. The farmer explained they had come to move the cattle to another pasture when they stumbled upon a shocking sight. The body of a young woman, naked from the waist up, lay in an open area inside a corral. It was clear she was dead. The scene was chilling. The corral was surrounded by hills and dense brush, an isolated area far from busy roads and populated places. It was unlikely anyone would end up there by chance, but it was the perfect place to hide a crime. When investigators approached the body, it was immediately clear they were dealing with a brutal murder. The woman had no identification on her, but the detectives had a gut feeling it was Julie Connell. The upper part of her body was exposed, with visible bruises and blood. The victim's throat had been slit from ear to ear. Her left wrist was tightly bound with a complex knot. Her right wrist was nearly severed. It seemed the perpetrator had tried to restrain the girl with such force that the cord cut deep into her skin. The condition of the body spoke of something horrific. There were defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, clear evidence that Julie had fought back with all her strength. There were abrasions on her knees, as if she had been dragged across the ground before being killed. A thorough examination of the body revealed that the assailant, in a fit of rage, had slashed the high schooler's throat 3 times, trying to silence her forever. Investigators meticulously combed the corral. They worked methodically, documenting every inch of the crime scene. On the second rail of the gate, they noticed dirty marks. It looked as though someone had climbed over the fence. The shoe prints were clear enough to be analyzed. Near the gate, detectives found a small plastic bag that had once contained a disposable scalpel. There was a red stain on the packaging, presumably blood. Experts also found several fingerprints on the gate itself and hoped they would aid the investigation. Soil analysis near the body showed that the girl had been killed at that very spot, as the blood had soaked deep into the ground in staggering amounts. The body hadn't been moved after death. There were no signs of dragging trampled grass or dirt. At 2 a.m, the phone rang in the Connell household. Jim answered, his heart gripped by fear. It was the call no parent wants to receive. On the line was a detective from the sheriff's department, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of devastating news. A young woman's body had been found, and they needed someone from the Connell family to identify it. Jim and Kathy silently prayed it wasn't their Julie. Soon, officers arrived at the front door and handed the couple an envelope containing photographs of the deceased girl's body. Jim looked first, the blood draining from his face, his heart shattering into a million pieces. It was Julie. He recognized her immediately, though the image was blurry and grainy. Tears streamed from his eyes, but Jim still couldn't process that his little girl was gone forever. He whispered that it was her, Julie. Now it was Kathy's turn. The mother sat in her daughter's bedroom on her bed when the photos were handed to her. She, too, couldn't hold back tears as she recognized her daughter's familiar features in the battered body. The parents were devastated when the officers gave them the only thing found with Julie, besides her clothes, a 10-cent coin. That was all that remained of the girl. Kathy had taught all her daughters to carry a dime, as it was the cost of a call from a payphone at the time. But sadly, the girl didn't get a chance to use it for some reason. Now, the Connells faced the heartbreaking task of telling their younger daughters, Patricia and Wendy, the crushing news about Julie. 12-year-old Patricia overheard her mother say that her older sister had died, but couldn't fully grasp what it meant or how to move forward. 15-year-old Wendy, the last to see Julie alive, couldn't cope with the grief and guilt. She replayed the final moments of that day in her mind countless times, unable to understand why she hadn't noticed any danger. The loss seemed to shatter the Connell family. Julie had been the glue holding them together. Wendy and Patricia adored their older sister and each dealt with their grief alone. Jim and Kathy couldn't look at each other, weighed down by the loss, but they were united by one common goal. Now they wanted justice, but their nightmare was only beginning. Julie Connell's body was taken to the coroner's office, where the full horror of the attack became clear. The autopsy painted a gruesome picture of the girl's final hours and underscored the brutality of the crime. The autopsy report was both a source of heartbreak and a critical piece of the investigation puzzle. The medical examiner determined that Julie's cause of death was massive blood loss from 3 deep cuts to her throat. One of them severed her carotid artery, ensuring the attacker that the victim wouldn't survive long. Julie's left wrist was tightly bound with a complex knot. The expert noted that the knot wasn't tied in haste. It was done by someone who likely had experience tying such knots. This detail clearly pointed to a planned attack. There were also ligature marks around her ankles, though no ropes were found at the scene. Additionally, the autopsy revealed clear evidence of non-consensual sexual assault, bruises, and tears. Semen samples were extracted from Julie's body. The medical examiner carefully preserved this material for the future, as DNA analysis in 1984 was still in its infancy. However, technology was advancing. At the time, the semen sample could only be used to compare blood types if a suspect was found. The autopsy results were devastating for the Connell family. The dry, impartial listing of the victim's injuries on paper caused unbearable pain, knowing what Julie had endured. Kathy Connell later said she couldn't stop imagining her daughter's final moments. Jim was more horrified that Julie had been bound, completely at the mercy of this monster. The brutality of the attack suggested the perpetrator was no novice. He may have committed similar attacks before and could do so again. Fear gripped the San Leandro community. The Connell story seemed unthinkable, as residents had always felt safe before. After Julie's case, parents stopped letting their children play outside alone. Kennedy Park, a beloved spot for picnics and relaxation, became a stark reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. It wasn't just a tragedy, but a warning that this could happen to anyone. The investigation into the attack on a high schooler in broad daylight in a public park moved painfully slowly. The police had no DNA databases or ways to track someone's phone, as cell phones didn't exist yet. Everything depended on witness statements, physical evidence, and luck. Statistically, if a case didn't progress within the first few weeks, it became a cold case. Julie disappeared in one place, and her body was found in another. Because the areas fell under different police jurisdictions, this caused confusion and delays in the investigation. Authorities argued over who should take the lead. As a result, detectives from both agencies worked on the case simultaneously, but interagency disputes slowed the exchange of information. From the start, the Connell family painfully endured all the bureaucratic red tape. They felt the authorities had wasted precious time by initially refusing to allocate resources to search for Julie. The parents saw this as neglect of their daughter's life. As the investigation dragged on, the frustration of the grieving parents only grew. Detectives tried to retrace Julie's final steps that day. They scoured Kennedy Park, but found no evidence. The next step was questioning those present in the park that day. Julie's sister Wendy, the last to see her, said she left around 1 o'clock. Julie was calmly sitting on her blanket with a book, surrounded by families enjoying the beautiful weather. Other park visitors confirmed seeing Julie, but no one heard screams or noticed anything suspicious. The investigation hit a dead end. Detectives decided to try something unconventional. They recreated Julie's last known moments and convinced local media to publicize it. The police hoped the reenactment might jog someone's memory and help solve the case. 15-year-old Wendy agreed to take her older sister's place. She was dressed in a similar lavender shirt and blue jeans and sat in the same spot in the park where Julie had been. The reenactment drew media attention. Nothing like it had been done before, so Wendy, portraying her deceased sister, was filmed by multiple cameras. The police's unexpected tactic worked and proved pivotal in solving the case, as investigators received a call. The manager of a nearby department store contacted the police. He reported that on the day Julie disappeared, the store had held an Easter party for employees in the park. This lead prompted detectives to question everyone who attended the event. They hoped to gather more information about the girl's disappearance from Kennedy Park. One employee recalled seeing Julie from a mini-train that circled the park. The ride lasted only a few minutes, but when the train returned, the girl was no longer on her blanket. Detectives also collected photos taken during the event in the park. The pictures captured various moments of the day, including the staff's arrival, setup, an ice cream and barbecue party, and even an Easter egg hunt. One photo, taken around noon, showed the spot where Julie was sitting. Unfortunately, nothing new was uncovered. By then, forensic experts had finished analyzing fingerprints on the gate, and that too was a disappointment. All of them belonged to the ranch owners where Julie's body was found. The dirty mark on the rail also yielded no direct matches. Even the scalpel packaging belonged to the ranch owners. This left detectives in despair. Although DNA technology in 1984 was severely limited, the sample allowed forensic experts to determine some basic traits of the attacker, including his blood type and the fact that he had reddish blonde hair. With no other leads, detectives began investigating whether similar knot-tying techniques appeared in other unsolved crimes. Several similar attacks on teenage girls had occurred recently. These cases bore chilling similarities to the crime against Julie, and detectives wondered if one person was responsible. To explore this possibility, the county sheriff formed a task force to investigate connections between these cases. Detectives examined every detail: the location of the attacks, the nature of the victim's wounds, and so on. But despite their efforts, no solid connections were found. It seemed Julie's murder was a singular act of violence. At least, at that stage, no one could prove otherwise. The lack of progress weighed heavily on Julie's family. Jim and Kathy Connell, tirelessly seeking justice for their daughter, grew weary and disillusioned. Constant media appearances and long nights replaying Julie's final moments in their minds took a toll. The crushing burden of not knowing was exhausting. For Wendy and Patricia, their older sister's tragic death cast a shadow over every aspect of their lives. Wendy later admitted that participating in the reenactment was both an honor and a burden. On one hand, it helped keep her sister's memory alive. On the other, it forced her to relive the trauma. For Patricia, every memory of Julie was like a blow to the chest. She couldn't look at her sister's books or listen to her favorite songs without crying. A month after Julie's death, the Connells began receiving threatening phone calls. They usually came late at night, directed at the entire family, but especially Julie's younger sisters Wendy and Patricia. The caller whispered that he knew their sister and threatened to do the same to them. The Connell family was terrified by these calls and immediately contacted the police. To identify the anonymous caller, detectives traced the call to a specific person. To their disappointment and surprise, it was just a prankster who thought it was funny. Although the prankster maliciously intimidated the family, he had no connection to Julie's murder. Time passed, and answers remained elusive. Weeks, months, and years went by. but the investigation didn't move forward. One detective honestly told the parents of the deceased girl that they might never find the killer. Julie's room became a home museum to her memory, a kind of shrine. Her bedroom remained exactly as it was before her disappearance. Her books, trinkets, even the wallet where she carefully kept her money, all remained untouched, a painful reminder of the life Julie left behind. The initial community support gradually faded, though the Connell family's emotional wound still hadn't healed. They didn't want their daughter's case to gather dust in the archives and kept fighting for justice, even as the trail went cold. Over a decade passed, potential leads fizzled out, suspects came and went, and investigators had nothing but unanswered questions. By the late 1990s, it seemed Julie Connell's case would join countless unsolved cases forgotten by all. At the time, no one knew that science was slowly catching up to the killer. The DNA sample taken from Julie's body during the autopsy became the key to unraveling the mystery that haunted them for years. The creation of the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, allowed law enforcement to compare DNA profiles from crime scenes with a national database of offenders, and suddenly, cases thought hopeless were solved. 14 years after Julie Connell's death, the district attorney's office decided to reopen her case. They sent the frozen DNA samples collected from the victim's body for analysis. It was a long and meticulous process. The frozen samples were fragile after so many years of storage. They had to be carefully prepared to avoid contamination or destruction. District Attorney Angela Backers, learning that the evidence from Julie's body didn't match anything in the CODIS database, was still determined to identify the killer who took the young girl's life. She turned to a friend, a renowned forensic scientist who had developed a unique system for comparing old DNA samples. After weeks of waiting, the results came in, and a match was finally found. The DNA belonged to a convicted criminal already on death row in a California prison. His name was Robert Boyd Rhodes. Robert had never been a suspect in Julie's murder. He hadn't even been on the police's radar. However, Rhodes had a lengthy criminal history. By the time his name was linked to the attack on Connell, Robert was already infamous for another heinous crime. In 1996, he kidnapped, tortured, and killed 8-year-old Michael Lyons in Yuba City, California. The crime was so horrific it made national headlines. The 8-year-old boy vanished while walking home from school. He lived with his mother, Sandra, his stepfather, and 2 younger sisters. The family resided in an apartment about a mile from the school. Sandra was a homemaker, and Michael's stepfather worked as a painter. They were hard-working people. Michael Lyons was known for his friendly demeanor. His classmates loved him. He often stayed after school to help teachers and always cracked jokes to lift everyone's spirits. One of Michael's neighbors later told the FBI he saw the boy walking home from school. Lyons lingered at a park between the fairgrounds and his home to play for a bit. The witness noticed a man approach the child, talk to him, and then put him in a truck and drive off. Since the boy didn't resist, the neighbor assumed they knew each other and didn't raise the alarm in time. But what could an 8-year-old boy do against a grown man? Less than 24 hours after the abduction, Michael Lyons' body was found in dense brush along a river. Officers immediately knew the boy had been killed. His body bore over 70 shallow stab wounds inflicted with a filleting knife. The nature of the wounds indicated the victim had been tortured. For several hours, Michael remained alive, enduring excruciating pain. However, the cause of death was a stab wound to the neck and back that severed his spinal cord. In his hand, Michael clutched a small silver bracelet. It must have been his only comfort in his final moments. Detectives also found signs of sexual assault. Lyons was naked from the waist down, with his dark green sweater pulled over his head. Nearby, on the riverbank, lay a blood-stained blanket. Robert Boyd Rhodes was caught by police when his truck got stuck in the mud about a kilometer from where Michael Lyons' body was found. When officers approached, he sat motionless in the driver's seat. shirtless, in wet jeans, and barefoot. His behavior was eerily calm, but his presence in the area was highly suspicious. Upon further inspection, police found a tow cable attached to a winch, wrapped around the truck's rear axle and tied to a tree. On the open tailgate lay a fishing knife with a thin, serrated blade. Between the blade and handle were traces of blood and river mud. DNA analysis later confirmed the blood belonged to Michael Lyons. When Robert was arrested, detectives learned he worked as a barber and lived in a small town called Sutter. But further investigation revealed his photo was in a list of 892 offenders who had committed crimes against minors. This was meant to protect society from monsters like him. Of course, this wasn't a very effective way to inform people who to watch out for in their neighborhood. With the advent of the internet, things became much easier. Michael's loss changed his family's life. The boy's mother, Sandra, called her son a ray of sunshine. He was a cheerful 8-year-old, and his senseless death at the hands of a heartless maniac shocked the world. Sandra later recounted how she sat alone for hours, thinking about the 10 hours of torture Michael endured. She couldn't stop imagining the pain her son suffered in those horrific moments. It took years for the emotional wound of losing her child to even begin to heal. Everything turned upside down. A mother's heart was torn from her chest, and Sandra had to learn to live with that pain. The emotional devastation didn't only affect the mother. Sandra's husband, Michael's stepfather, began drinking heavily to cope with the grief. Her younger daughters couldn't understand why their brother was no longer with them. Michael's youngest sister, Alethea, who was only 5 at the time, later said she spent months sitting on the porch steps, waiting for Michael to come home from school, wrapped in his favorite Spider-Man blanket. The day Michael Lyons died, every member of his family died in their own way. Sandra's grief over losing her son could have consumed her entirely, but the woman found the strength to fight. She dedicated herself to activism, transforming her pain into protecting other families from such nightmares. Sandra became a fierce advocate for laws targeting criminals. The mother who lost her child tirelessly educated other parents on how to protect their children. She often spoke at schools, warning students about the dangers strangers could pose. Sandra's advocacy extended far beyond her local community. She spoke before lawmakers, participated in rallies, and collaborated with other parents who had lost children to violent crimes. In memory of her son, Sandra founded the Michael Lyons Foundation, which raises awareness about crimes against children and supports victims' families. But all this came after Robert had already committed a series of crimes and was now linked to Julie Connell's murder. In 1985, just a year after Julie's death, Rhodes attacked another woman. He broke into her home, held her at gunpoint, handcuffed her to a pipe, and assaulted her. Then, with her bound, he put her in his truck and drove toward a river. In a desperate bid to survive, the woman managed to jump out of the moving vehicle. When Robert backed up, intending to run her over, she rolled to the side of the road, got up, and ran to the nearest building for help. Robert was arrested and convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault. For some reason, Rhodes didn't stay in prison long. As soon as he was released, he returned to his old habits. In 1993, he assaulted the 4-year-old granddaughter of a woman he was dating at the time. This crime led to another conviction for lewd acts with a minor. Despite his convictions, Rhodes remained free for much of his life. After the murder of Michael Lyons, he was finally sentenced to death in 1999. In 2002, his DNA matched the semen samples taken from Julie's body in 1984. The prosecutor and the prosecution team weren't confident they could secure a conviction against Robert based solely on DNA evidence. Rhodes's attorney could easily claim the sexual act between his client and the victim was consensual. So detectives needed to find something else linking him to Julie's death. No one was as invested in the case as the Connell family and District Attorney Angela Backers. She pieced together evidence, dedicating all her time to it. Her efforts soon paid off. Angela found one of Robert's former girlfriends from 1984. This ex-girlfriend revealed two crucial details. First, Rhodes lived less than a block from Kennedy Park, where Julie was last seen. Second, at the time, he drove a green truck. This vehicle led Angela to consider that the perpetrator might have parked near Kennedy Park. Backers retrieved old photos collected from department store employees who held the outdoor Easter party. Armed with a magnifying glass, she examined each photo inch by inch, looking for a green vehicle near the park. In one blurry, low-quality photo, Angela spotted a green truck. Then she looked down and couldn't believe her eyes. Just a few meters from the truck, sitting on a blanket, was Julie Connell. It was hard to make out details, but the lavender color of her shirt confirmed the obvious. This was the connection they were looking for. All the evidence combined allowed the district attorney to charge Robert Boyd Rhodes with Julie Connell's murder. In 2007, 23 years after the girl's death, the case went to trial. By then, Rhodes was already on death row for Michael Lyons' murder, but prosecutors were determined to hold him accountable for Julie's death as well. According to the prosecution, after Connell finished studying, she packed her things in her backpack and was ready to head home. No one knew exactly what happened next, but Robert somehow convinced the girl to approach his truck, then grabbed her and dragged her inside. He likely watched Julie from his vehicle. The defendant's attorney, knowing the DNA evidence would be critical to the prosecution's case, claimed that 31-year-old Robert Rhodes and 18-year-old Julie Connell were in a romantic relationship. Robert's sister even testified, saying she saw them together and described them as a couple. It's unclear why she tried to protect her brother, who was already sentenced to death. The claim shocked and outraged Julie's family. What could connect a diligent high schooler with an adult man who had broken the law multiple times? The defense's argument was not only absurd but deeply offensive to Julie's memory. The trial was exhausting for the Connell family. They had to relive every detail of their daughter and sister's tragic death. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before reaching a verdict. Robert Boyd Rhodes was found guilty of Julie Connell's murder and sentenced to death. In the end, Rhodes became one of the few people in California to receive multiple death sentences. Kennedy Park, once a place of joy, became a place of sorrow and a symbol of resilience. A memorial bench was installed there in honor of the slain girl, a reminder that she was more than just a victim. Julie Connell was a daughter, a sister, and a bright light extinguished too soon. Though justice was served and the verdict brought a sense of closure, it didn't end the grief of her parents and sisters. They kept asking themselves questions. Who would Julie have become if she hadn't died? Who would she have married? What heights would she have reached in her life? Sadly, they'll never know because Robert Rhodes stole Julie's future. This story reminds us of the fragility of life and teaches us never to give up. The Connell family's decades-long fight for justice, their persistence, and their refusal to let Julie's case be forgotten are powerful lessons in courage and hope for everyone else. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.